Hello, everybody from WHO. Hello. I can see
Hello.
Gilbert and I can see Heather. Hello.
Good afternoon, good morning.
Hello. This is Mona Abdul.
Hello.
Good morning to you in New York.
Good morning.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mona. How are you? Good morning.
I'm fine. How are you?
Thank you. Well done. Thank you. Good morning,
Good to
everyone.
see you again. Yeah.
Good to see you again. Good morning.
President.
Good morning. How are you, my brother?
Yeah, very good. Huh?
That's good.
Oh,
Thank
yes.
you very much indeed.
Yeah, you made a lot of important events. Thank you for your support.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm glad to be part of this very important event. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, yeah, you are coming back this event special. Huh? First GPA participant this event. Huh? You are made
No,
history. You are made
very
a
important.
history record.
No, food security is very important for all of us.
Yeah, I can feel your heart
Of course.
clues to that. And also, today we also invited the president of the CFS. Also,
Oh,
it's the
this is
first
very good.
time also. So
This
we
is very
made
good.
the most president historical record on the SOFI. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you. Thank you for your kind invitation, Director General. Thank you for
I said we are on the same boat. Huh? I don't want to split our solidarity, no?
Oh,
Thank you.
I saw so many other ambassadors. Kiptan is here, and Hans is here, Hungary.
stronger together.
Yeah, that's a virtual meeting. It's an advantage. So, Beasley, David, are you okay?
How you doing? Good to see you.
Yeah, very hot in Iran, huh? It's very hot.
Very hot and humid. The heat's not so bad, it's the humidity. Yeah, it's just brutal.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon. Good
Okay.
evening.
Okay, great.
I think we're ready to start.
Yeah, please.
Your Excellency, Tijani Muhammad Bande, President of the 74th United Nations General Assembly. Your Excellency, Mona Yul, President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council. Your Excellency, Tanawa Tiensen, Chairperson of the UN Committee on World Food Security. Your Excellency, Emanuela Del Rey, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, as Chair of the Group of Friends of Food Security and Nutrition. Ms. Carola van Rijnshoever, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and Director of the Inclusive Green Growth Department. Ms. Carla Montesi, Director, DevCo, People and Planet. Ms. Gerda Verber, Coordinator of the Sun Movement. Excellencies, heads of agencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lana Wong, and I'd like to welcome all of you to this special event of the 2020 ECOSOC High-Level Political Forum. Today, we're launching the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World, also known as the SOFI report. This report presents the latest estimates of hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition in all its forms around the world. And it's a great example of collaboration and the one UN ethos, as 5 UN agencies co-authored this report: FAO, IFAD, UNICEF, WFP, and WHO. This is the second time it's being launched at the High-Level Political Forum, and although COVID has forced us to go online, we do hope this virtual launch will enable us to share the report even more widely. So before we dive into the report, we do have a few housekeeping notes. I'd like to remind you that interpretation is available in all 6 of the UN official languages, and they can be selected in the bottom bar. Due to a technical limitation of the platform, Arabic is available on the Korean channel. Today's event has 5 segments. We'll start with a high-level opening, followed by statements by the heads of the co-authoring agencies, a presentation of the report details, followed by a high-level panel discussion, and then we'll wrap with a Q&A session. If you'd like to ask a question, please use the Q&A and the chat boxes. To request the floor, please use the raised hand function in the participants menu next to your name. The chat function will be used to share technical details and also to share resources. We do need to finish this event on time, so I ask our esteemed speakers to please keep to the time limits requested. This event is also being webcast live and will be available on the FAO and UN sites afterwards. And for those of you on social media, please use the hashtag SOFI 2020. If you're new to the SOFI report, it's a critical tool used by the UN system to monitor the Sustainable Development Goal targets of ending hunger, SDG target 2.1, and ending all forms of malnutrition, SDG target 2.2. This year's report has a special focus on transforming food systems for affordable, healthy diets. It also presents an assessment of COVID-19's impact on food security based on emerging forecasts of global economic growth. There's a lot to learn and discuss today, so before we dive in, let's kick off with a video.
We are facing a global fight to address one of the biggest challenges of our time. 5 years after committing to eradicate hunger, we are not on track to reach our goals by 2030.
Chronic hunger is up by 10 million people in 1 year and up by nearly 60 million in 5 years. Almost 690 million people went hungry in 2019, with numbers highest in Asia and rising fastest in Africa.
If these trends continue, more than 840 million people will be hungry by 2030, with Africa overtaking Asia as the region affected most. The COVID-19 pandemic could add over 100 million people to this distressing toll.
Overcoming hunger is just one part of the problem. 2 billion people do not have regular access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. In 2019, 144 million children under the age of 5 were stunted,
while 47 million were affected by wasting. We are not on track to meet our 2030 targets for child stunting, low birth weight, and exclusive breastfeeding.
Countries are also facing the growing burden of obesity linked to poor quality diets, with 676 million of adults obese.
Around the world, many people are suffering from hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition because they cannot afford healthy diets.
Even the cheapest healthy diets are out of reach for more than 3 billion people in the world. In sub-Saharan Africa and Southern Asia, around 57% of the population cannot afford nutritious food.
Our current dietary patterns are also taking a heavy toll in terms of health costs and the environment. By 2030, diet-related health costs linked to mortality and non-communicable diseases could be more than $1.3 trillion a year, while diet-related costs of greenhouse gas emissions could be more than $1.7 trillion a year.
As the world fights COVID-19, we cannot allow the pandemic to stop the global fight on hunger and malnutrition. To achieve a world free from hunger and malnutrition by 2030, countries must transform food systems and increase the affordability of healthy diets.
Shifting to healthy diets could reduce direct and indirect health costs by up to 97%,
while reducing the social costs of greenhouse gas emissions by up to 74%. We must ensure the cost of nutritious foods comes down.
If the whole world shifts towards a healthy diet, we have a real chance at ending hunger and malnutrition, once and for all.
We must act now to build back better and make a difference in lives and communities everywhere.
I know we're all overwhelmed these days by a lot of sad and difficult news, given the multiple crises we're facing: the COVID crisis, the economic crisis, the climate crisis, the education emergency, the global reckoning over racial and social injustice. With all of this bad news, it's sometimes easy to ignore the devastating numbers you just saw in that video and what they really mean in terms of human lives. We are sadly not on track to achieve zero hunger by 2030, which is the goal that the world set 5 years ago. So what can we do? How can we accept that billions of people go hungry every day in a world that actually does produce enough food to feed its entire population? How can we transform food systems to make healthy diets affordable for everyone? The SOFI report aims to arm policymakers with the best data, analysis, and recommendations for urgent action on this issue. There is absolutely no time to waste. And so it is with my honor to recognize the President of the General Assembly, the President of ECOSOC, and the Chairperson of CFS. I'd like to invite the President of ECOSOC to deliver her remarks as the host of the SOFI launch during this year's HLPF, organized under the auspices of ECOSOC. Please welcome Her Excellency Monica Yule, host and President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. President of the General Assembly, Excellencies, colleagues. I'm pleased to join you here today for the launch of the State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World. Since 2017, this major report has monitored progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals on ending hunger and all forms of malnutrition. And I commend the Food and Agriculture Organization, the International Fund for Agricultural Development, the United Nations International Children's Fund, the World Food Programme, and the World Health Organization for working together on this year's report. It is a true demonstration of the benefits of collaboration and shows UN reform in action. Excellencies, this report could not be more urgent. The 2019 report already stressed that more than 820 million people went hungry to bed every night. And now, COVID-19 threatens our health, economic, and social fabric. It will, without doubt, also exacerbate hunger and food insecurity. As the Secretary General has highlighted, measures to control the pandemic are affecting our global food supply chains. Border restrictions and lockdowns are slowing harvests. Millions of seasonal workers are left without livelihoods, and transportation of food to markets is constrained. Supply chain disruption have forced farmers to bury perishable produce and dump milk. People in urban centers are struggling to access fresh and nutritious food. And among already vulnerable groups, rural women have been particularly hard hit. All this points to the crisis that does not stop when COVID-19 ends. Colleagues, as we enter into the decade of action and delivery in a crisis context, the need to fully achieve the SDGs, including SDG 2, to end hunger, has never been greater. And this year's SOFI report has an important role to play here at the HLPF to inform our discussions and responses with valuable policy recommendations. We must engage all stakeholders to combat hunger and food insecurity and build the integrated food system we need. ECOSOC will continue to do its part, bringing a multidimensional approach, including underscoring the importance of gender in food security. Excellencies, farmer knows very well that you reap what you sow. To recover better, we have to transform agriculture for people and planet. Just as the world must build back better from the crisis, so too must we grow back better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ECOSOC President. My apologies, Mona Yule, for the important role you're playing to help the world achieve the global goals and for your commitment to fighting hunger. I'd now like to welcome His Excellency Tijani Muhammad Bande, President of the 74th Session of the United Nations General Assembly.
Your Excellency, Ambassador Mona Yule, President of the Economic and Social Council, Excellencies, distinguished guests. I commend the President of the Economic and Social Council for hosting this important launch event at a time when achieving the goal of zero hunger faces even heightened challenges. I also congratulate Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations and all UN agencies involved in the preparation of this year's report on the state of food security and nutrition around the world. As we contend with the COVID-19 pandemic, the SOFI report is timely. I trust that the data, analysis, and projections will assist us in gauging the scale of the challenges ahead and equip us to make informed decisions to end hunger. In 2015, the world pledged to end hunger and all forms of malnutrition. We need to redouble our efforts to fulfill this pledge, especially during this crisis. Over 2 million people today suffer from malnutrition. Indeed, those suffering from hunger are at greater risk of developing severe COVID-19 symptoms as a result of associated health conditions, such as malnutrition and non-communicable diseases, which compromise the immune system. Compounding this is the fact that those who are hungry are often trapped in poverty and do not have access to health services, water, and sanitation facilities, or indeed the space to quarantine or practice social distancing. To this end, I welcome the priority actions outlined in Secretary General's policy brief regarding the impact of COVID-19 on food security and nutrition. In both our rapid response to the pandemic and our long-term planning, we must bolster our food supply chains. Indeed, it's critical to focus attention where the risk is greatest. We must preserve critical humanitarian food supplies, expand social protection measures, and prioritize nutrition assistance programs for the most vulnerable. Excellencies, today's discussion, and indeed the SOFI report itself, will enrich our work and as we approach the Food Systems Summit in 2021. I thank the Secretary General for his leadership in convening this timely event as we embark upon the decade of action and deliberate to implement the Sustainable Development Goals with a focus on the need for urgent action on nature. We must proceed in a sustainable manner, ensuring a pathway toward efficient land use, biodiversity, and climate change mitigation. To improve nutrition, we must transform our food systems into equitable, efficient, resilient, and sustainable systems which are fit for purpose. As a result of rapid urbanization, multinational corporations, traders, and retailers have gained a crucial role in food supply chains. I trust that governments will forge new partnerships and deepen existing connections with private sector and other stakeholders to develop synergies and enhance the outreach and health impact of our food systems. Excellencies, malnutrition continues to surge at alarming rates, with obesity, undernutrition, and micronutrient deficiency affecting communities, and in particular, low-income groups around the world. Women and children are disproportionately affected. 1 in 3 women of reproductive age suffer from anemia as a result of malnutrition. Moreover, more than 1 in 5 children under the age of 5 is stunted. This is a scourge unbefitting of our era and demonstrates the deep structural flaws in our food systems in a world where about 1/3 of all food produced is wasted or lost. As we build back better, we must prioritize the farm-to-fork process of ensuring nutrient-rich food. I call on all stakeholders to work with farmers to promote nutrient-dense crops and biofortification, paying particular heed to the needs of smallholder and subsistence farmers, women, and children. This is the foundation of healthy food environments where food production, marketing, placement, and pricing policies are all geared toward nutrient-rich diets. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, the health and socioeconomic impact of the coronavirus pandemic has disrupted life as we know it. Communities will endure the consequence of this fallout for some time to come. And for some developing countries that are dependent on commodities, tourism, and migrant remittances, the road to recovery will be even more arduous. I trust that in this 75th anniversary of the United Nations, we'll emulate the resilience and fortitude of our predecessors and strive together to build a better world for all. I thank you for continued commitment to Sustainable Development Goals and your determination to end hunger and malnutrition. I thank you.
Thank you very much, President of the UNGA, for your work and dedication to zero hunger and poverty eradication. I'd now like to welcome His Excellency Tanawat Tiensin, Chairperson of the UN Committee on World Food Security and Permanent Representative of Thailand to the UN agencies in Rome.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderators, Madam Presidents of ECOSOC and Presidents of 74 United Nations General Assembly and Principals of 3 Rome-based agencies, Excellency, distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen. It is my honor and pleasure to be here today for the launch of the SOFI 2020 report. And I would like to thank FAO Director General Chu Dong-ju for this invitation to speak and also to congratulate FAO and his team for coordinating the preparation of these flagship publications in close collaboration with IFAD, WFP, UNICEF, and WHO. As the chairperson of the Committee on World Food Security, CFS, the SOFI report is very crucial to us. It is the key report that provides us with the facts and figures to tell us whether we as a global community are doing what the CFS was reformed to achieve. The eliminations of hungers and malnutrition. As we all know, despite progress since 2009, when the CFS was reformed, over the last 5 years, we have watched hungers and malnutrition numbers going in the wrong direction, which is different from our expectation. Therefore, we need our commitments and our actions to work together to end hungers and improve food security and nutrition. Not only are overweight, obesity, and diet-related non-communicable diseases increasing worldwide, adding complexities and urgencies to our collective challenge. We also now have COVID-19, highlighting the fragilities of our global and local food system and worsening the world hunger and nutrition situation. So the SOFI report tells us what we already know. We are off track on SDG 2. It's related our targets. We all must accelerate and deepen our commitment now, and we call for your support. We know there are significant policy outcome trade-offs related to achieving SDG 2 and other SDGs. We must be aware of these trade-offs and find the right balance between the social, economic, and environmental components of sustainable development. How can CFS help in these complex challenges? Let me tell you, the CFS is currently undertaking a policy process to produce voluntary guidelines on food system and nutrition for adoption at its next plenary, CFS 47. Informed by detailed scientific report of the CFS high-level panel of experts, these guidelines will serve as a global reference point and guidance for countries to accelerate efforts to eradicate all forms of malnutrition, promoting policy coherence through a food system lens, and promoting and transforming a sustainable food system that contribute to and enable healthy diets. CFS now developing new policy recommendation on agroecological and other innovative approaches for food security and nutrition, also to be adopted at CFS 47 in coming February 2021. Their aim is to assist members and stakeholders in strengthening agroecological and other innovative approaches for sustainable agriculture and food system that enhance food securities and nutrition, consistent with the 2030 agenda's call for bold and transformative steps, which are urgently needed to shift the world onto sustainable and resilient path, while seeking to realize the human rights for all. These products will supplement the CFS principle for responsible investments, our guidelines on governance of tenures known as the CFS VGGT, and the wide variety of other policy products we have produced as public goods for countries and others to use. I also encourage you to read the CFS HLPE latest report, The Global Narrative Toward 2030 for Food Securities and Nutrition, in which the panel of experts proposes an innovative conceptual framework for food securities and nutrition and recommend the specific solution, including on global governance. Ladies and gentlemen, let me conclude by saying we have a collective duty to ensure there is enough healthy and nutritious food for everyone that is produced within our planetary boundaries. COVID-19 is a stark reminder that business as usual is not an option for everyone. We can and must learn from each other how to produce food in a way that feed our population sufficiently, healthily, and that respect the quality of our air, water, soil, forest, ocean, and environment. CFS will continue to be the unique global UN platform committed to bringing together countries and other key stakeholders to advocate policy convergence and actions to address the shortcomings and challenges identified by the SOFI report. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for all that you do to help the world address food security. And now we're pleased to share a special message from Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General of the United Nations.
This year's State of Food Security and Nutrition in the World report sends a sobering message. In much of the world, hunger remains deeply entrenched and is rising. Countries continue to grapple with malnutrition in all its forms, including the growing burden of obesity. The COVID-19 pandemic is making things even worse. Many more people could slip into hunger this year. We cannot let this happen. The report is clear. If the current trend continues, we will not achieve Sustainable Development Goal 2, zero hunger by 2030. The transformation can begin now. Investment in COVID-19 response and recovery need to help deliver on our longer-term goal of a more inclusive and sustainable world. We must make food systems more sustainable, resilient, and inclusive for people and planet. This is why I'm convening a Food Systems Summit next year. We must make healthy diets affordable and accessible for everyone.
Thank you, Secretary General, for that important message. And if I can please just remind everyone that this is also available on webcast if you are having problems connecting. So thank you very much to all of our distinguished speakers. Our high-level opening segment has now concluded, so let's move on to our second segment. The heads of the partner agencies that have produced this report will now present their 3-minute statements. I'd love to start with Dr. Chu Dong-yu, the Director General of the Food and Agricultural Organization. Thank you.
Your Excellencies, and the President of EXOCA, President of General Assembly, and also Chairperson of CFS, my dear colleagues and the head of the partners agency, permanent representatives, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Rome. On behalf of Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, and together with our partner agencies, I'm pleased to present to you the 2020 edition of the State of the Food Security and Nutrition in the World. This is the first time we produce this report jointly, which reaffirms our commitment to work together to overcome the challenges of freeing the world from hunger, food insecurity, and all forms of malnutrition. This is also the second time the report is launched at the margins of the high-level political forum, HLPF discussion. The theme of this year's report, Transforming Food System for Affordable Healthy Diets, is especially relevant to the theme of this year's HLPF, Accelerated Action of Transforming Pathways, Realize the Decade of Action, and Deliver for Sustainable Development. 5 years have passed since the world committed to the globe, the end of handing, and food insecurity and malnutrition in all its forms. We only have 10 years more to prove that our commitments and actions are bold enough. This report clearly states that today we are not on track to eradicate hunger, food insecurity, and all forms of malnutrition by 2030. And we will need to redouble efforts, given the challenges brought about by COVID-19. The pandemic poses a threat to food security and nutrition. This is one of the top line messages of Secretary General policy brief on the impact of COVID-19 on food security and nutrition. Ladies and gentlemen, this report reminds us all that our efforts needed to be bolder. In the past 5 years, 16 million joined the ranks of undernourished. In 2019 alone, 10 more million people went hungry. This is unacceptable. Globally, the battle of malnutrition in all its forms also remains a challenge, and the world is not on track to achieve the 2025 and the 2030 targets. In some areas, such as adult overweight and obesity, and we are actually moving in the wrong direction in all these regions. Well, the full impact of COVID-19 on food security is yet to be seen. Between the 83 to 132 more millions of people could be pushed into hunger this year. The nutritional status of the most vulnerable groups is also likely to deteriorate. Ladies and gentlemen, in spite of these challenges, we know where to act and how. People in all regions of the world are suffering from hunger, food insecurity, and malnutrition because they cannot afford the cost of healthy diets, especially the poor. To be precise, more than 3 billion people in the world cannot afford a healthy diet, which is disappointing if we consider the world produces enough food to feed its entire population. A healthy diet can cost 5 times more than diets that meet only dietary and energy needs through the starchy staple food. We must ensure healthy diets are affordable for everyone. And sometimes SDGs challenge us to think out of the box, to see how our efforts towards one goal enable process towards our other goals. Our direct choice is not to protect us against non-communicable disease and are contributing to the cost of environmental degradation. This report shows the shifting to health diets that are environmentally sustainable can contribute substantially to reducing health and climate change costs by 2030. Such a shift will not only help to eradicate food insecurity and malnutrition SDG 2, but also it will generate important synergies for pursuing healthy lives SDG 3 and taking urgent action to combat climate change SDG 13. Ladies and gentlemen, for this potential gain for people and the planet to materialize, we must ensure that the cost of nutritious food goes down. And we know that the factors driving the cost of nutritious food upwards exist throughout the food system. We must transform our food system to reduce the cost of nutritious food, ensure everybody can afford a healthy diet all over the world. Globally, I am confident that the policy recommendations Humanity from this report will contribute to the setting the agenda for the 2021 UN Food System Summit. At the country level, government must act taking into consideration their specific context, as there is no one size fits for all solution to achieve the transformation. FAO, its partners in this report, and the UN as a whole, we're here to help them in their actions. I thank you all. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you so much for your call to think out of the box for healthy people and a healthy planet, Dr. Chu. I'd now like to introduce Mr. Gilbert Humbo, President of the International Fund for Agricultural Development. You have the floor.
Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Excellency Mona Chu, President of ECOSOC, Excellency Tijani Mohamed Bande, the President of the GA, Ambassadors, Permanent Representative, Dear Excellency Tanawat Tiansen, the Chairperson of the CFS. You know, the video we saw at the very beginning and the intervention that Dr. Chu just mentioned clearly laid out the facts and the data before us. And those data, as sobering as they are at the time where we also know that we are struggling with the COVID-19 with more than 500,000 deaths so far. And we do know that each of those deaths is an individual person. It is individual tragedy. I would like to submit that it is also an individual tragedy for each of the 690 million women and children and men suffering from hunger. This is not the type of hunger that you and I feel when we miss a meal per se. It is the chronic lack of food and the undernutrition that prevent children, women, and men from living normal, active, and healthy lives. Let me just leave you and share with you three thoughts. The first one, I hope we will all agree that this situation, which is quite intolerable, important to remind ourselves that we are 7.8 billion in the world, but we grow food to feed more than 10 billion. Yet, the problem is not a global production problem. It's the persistent chronic hunger is the result of poverty, inequality, conflict, poor governance, and the marginalization of the most vulnerable members of our society. In a nutshell, it is a problem of social and economic exclusion. It is a matter of social injustice. Second, 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. This includes almost 60% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa and Asia, as we saw it in the video. Too often, it is farmers and their families who go hungry. And why? Because they are excluded from various services, including the financial services, the access to markets, and excluded from economic opportunities. They cannot afford, because of that, they can't afford the food, let alone afford a healthy diet. Thirdly, we cannot continue thinking of agriculture, the environment, the health, the poverty and hunger in isolation. World problems are so interconnected that the solutions are also intertwined. Dear colleagues, the current pandemic is a wake-up call to us all. This year, an additional 83 to 130 million people may be pushed into hunger because of the economic fallout of COVID-19. We can certainly say that today's pandemic will not be the final shock. Today is COVID, yesterday was Ebola, tomorrow it might be something else. It is unacceptable that millions of people are hungry in a world that produces enough food for all. As we move forward to the Food System Summit that the Secretary General talked about, we must join forces to advance more resilient, more sustainable, and more equitable inclusion of our food system. And we must act now. Thank you so much. Over to you, moderator.
Thank you so much for your urgent call for resilience and equity, Mr. Humbo. Let's now hear from Ms. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF.
Thank you very much, colleagues, ladies, gentlemen. Let me build on the comments of my colleagues. We are launching a report at an extraordinary moment. COVID-19 and the unprecedented measures to contain it have revealed in stark light the weaknesses and the inequalities in children's access to adequate food and nutrition. Major disruptions in the food, health, social protection systems are putting an increasing number of children at risk of malnutrition. We estimate that COVID-19 will result in a 15% rise in the number of wasted children and an additional 6 to 7 million children needing critical nutrition services, mostly in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. In the absence of decisive and timely action, we could also see up to 10,000 more child deaths per month. At the same time, many communities in Eastern Africa are facing outbreaks of desert locusts, which are having a huge impact on the nutritional status of the most vulnerable children and families. Barriers to food and nutrition security like these threaten all of the progress that we've made in recent years. The report that we are launching today reminds us of how much work we have to do to ensure that every person and every child in every community has secure and reliable access to adequate food and nutrition, because we are dramatically off track to reach our 2030 SDG targets for nutrition. For example, the report highlights that too few of the world's children are growing well. While we've achieved some progress, reducing the prevalence of stunting by 1/3 since 2000, it's not enough to achieve the SDG target by for overweight continue to grow. Nutrition is important throughout a person's life, but the effects of a poor diet can begin in the earliest days, during the first 1,000 days of life, especially when children are starting to eat their first foods at 6 months old. They need a range of nutrients to grow well. If they do not get these nutrients, the effects can be devastating. Last year, every 5th child in the world was stunted, and at least 1 in 2 children suffered from micronutrient deficiencies, an indication of poor quality in their diets. In short, 2/3 of the world's children are not getting the diverse and healthy food that they need to grow well. The report also reminds us why this is happening. As food insecurity increases and affordability decreases, the quality of people's diets worsens. As we speak, 3 billion people in the world cannot afford a nutritious diet, and it's an injustice of global scale. Especially children in rural households, who are twice as likely to eat poorly compared to children in urban areas. And the children who live in the poorest households are twice as likely to eat poorly as those in the rich households. So as a global community, we need to make more nutritious, healthy diets accessible to everyone, everywhere. The report calls for a transformation of global food systems to drive down the cost and to drive up families' access to nutritious, safe, affordable, and sustainable diets. To do this, we need governments to show political will, to safeguard food security, to invest in nutrition, and expand social protection programs for the poorest and most vulnerable households. We need innovation from businesses to drive down costs and to develop nutritious, safe, and affordable food for families. And we must find new ways to provide parents and children and adolescents with the support and information that they need to ensure that they're getting healthy and nutritious food that they need to grow well. These findings are echoed in UNICEF's State of the World's Children report last year, which focused on nutrition. It found that when healthy options are available, convenient, and affordable, children and families make better food choices. And when governments invest in nutrition and other systems to support nutrition, health, water, sanitation, education, and social protection programs, people's nutrition improves and children's nutrition improves. Because ultimately, no one sector, government, agency, or business will be able to solve these problems on their own. We must unite as a global community around the food and nutrition needs of every person and every child. And that is why, for example, partnerships are at the heart of UNICEF's work around the world to improve access to nutrition. And partnerships are a driving force behind the Scale Up Nutrition, or SUN movement, and the Global Nutrition Cluster for Humanitarian Action. Public and private partners that are joining forces to support governments and to end malnutrition in all its forms. At every point in a child's life, food systems and food environment must be designed and delivered to support good diets. Their physical and mental development depends on it. And as a global community looking to children and young people to shape our future, well, so do we. As the world grapples with COVID-19, we have a unique opportunity to reimagine better, more secure, more sustainable food systems for the future. We hope this report is not only a wake-up call, but that it is a call to action to make healthy foods affordable and available everywhere for all people throughout their lives, and to end malnutrition once and for all. So UNICEF looks forward to working with our partners to achieve this. Thank you, Madam Moderator.
Thank you so much, Ms. for your call for innovation and cross-sectoral collaboration to address this issue that impacts the poorest and most vulnerable children the hardest. Let's now turn, please, to Mr. David Beasley, Executive Director of the World Food Program.
Lena, thank you very much. It's good to be with each and every one around the world at whatever time zone you're in this afternoon, this evening, or this morning. And, you know, I would like to be here talking about some good news. And quite frankly, when I joined as a senior leader in the United Nations, along with Henrietta Ford, my colleagues, just a few years ago, I was hopeful that I could be a part of the team that would put the World Food Program out of business. In other words, we wouldn't need outside support. We wouldn't need emergency operations, and the world would be moving toward the sustainable goals we all been dreaming of. But quite frankly, the opposite is happening. It's hard to believe that literally all the progress that we've made in the last 200 years, when you think about the world population, literally 200 years ago was 1.1 billion, and 95% of the people were in poverty, 85% extreme poverty. And look what we've achieved in 200 years. Amazing. Now less than 8% of the people in extreme poverty. But in the last 4 or 5 years, we're seeing a tremendous change in direction that's not good. When I joined in 2016, when we did the 2017 is when I joined, we had 777 million people that were chronically food insecure, going to bed basically hungry. And today, that number would be it was 821 million last year. And today, when you take China out, we actually have gone up another 60 million. And so obviously, we're not going to hit our SDG goals for 2030. What's been driving this? Man-made conflict, weather extremes, weather shocks, and the list goes on. But now, we've got COVID impacting an already desperate situation. But that's not really what bothers me more than anything. What bothers me more than anything is the simple fact that acute food insecurity, and I'm talking about people that are marching toward the brink of starvation, people that don't know where their next meal is coming from. They're living literally from hand to mouth every single day. And so that number, which was just about 80 million a few years ago, now has spiked to 135 million people. And now that's before COVID. In COVID, that number literally could double to 270 million people on the brink of starvation by the end of 2020. Last year, the World Food Program we assisted about 100 million people. Only 3 years ago, we were doing about 80 million people. I want that number to go down because we're no longer needed in these desperate emergency humanitarian disasters. But it's going the wrong direction. This year, we plan to scale up to 135 to 140 million people. Now, how in the world are we going to be able to do that when economies are in shambles? I was saying just a few months ago, that literally before COVID, that 2020 was going to be the worst humanitarian crisis year since the beginning of the United Nations, since World War II. Wow. That was before COVID. That was before the desert locust. And let me keep going. The economies around the world, they've had to put $17 trillion into stimulating their economies because the golden goose that lays the golden egg, you know, we've got to make sure those economies are strong because of remittances and the loss of jobs and so many complex issues that developing nations are facing in nations that are in war and conflict. We've got our hands full right now, and we need everyone to come together. This is not a time to retreat on poor nations. This is not a time to go backwards. We've made so much progress, and now we're going in the wrong direction. We've got enough wealth in this world to feed every single person on earth, even with all of the catastrophes that we're facing. Yes, a COVID pandemic combined with a hunger pandemic, I don't think the world can tolerate it. I believe if we get our act together, we come together and collaborate with the expertise and the experience, just sitting in this conference alone, we can end hunger. We've got to end the wars. We've got to make certain that we thread that needle right now between COVID pandemic and how we react to that, along with a hunger pandemic. Because if we do it right, we can stave off starvation, mass migration, political destabilization. But if we don't handle it right, you're going to see mass starvation, famines, mass migration, political destabilization. And the cost of that is 1,000 times more than coming in and addressing at the early stages and doing it right. We've seen the consequences when we don't do it up front and do it right. The children around the world depend on us. The world needs us, and it's time that we come together in such a way that we save from a catastrophe that truly will be unprecedented in the history of mankind. And so it's great to be here. I just wish we had some good news.
Thank you very much, Mr. Beasley. With all due respect, I do wish WFP was out of business too, but let's hope we can all pull together and get some urgent action. I'd now like to give the floor to Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, Assistant Director General of UHC Healthier Populations at the World Health Organization.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. And it is my pleasure to launch the report and join this event together with FAO, WFP, IFAD, and UNICEF. The Sustainable Development Agenda emphasizes the eradication of food insecurity and all forms of malnutrition. The report showed how much the burden of the malnutrition remains a challenge globally. Some progress has been made in reducing childhood stunting as well as for low birth weight and exclusive breastfeeding. However, there are still unacceptably 144 million children affected by stunting, and the biggest challenge in reducing it remains for sub-Saharan Africa. On the other side, childhood overweight is not improving, and adult obesity is moving in the wrong direction across the world. On top of that, the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to aggravate the burden, allowing for wasting and an additional 7 million children with wasting on top of the current 47 million are estimated. Worth noting that currently we are able to provide adequate support to only 10 million wasted children. Dysfunctional food system and unhealthy food environments are driving nutrition and health inequities. The COVID-19 pandemic has revealed and exacerbated the extreme inequities in our food systems. Many households face growing difficulty in accessing nutrition food, making it even more difficult for the poor and vulnerable to eat a healthy diet. And healthy diet are the major risk factor of multiple forms of malnutrition and health outcome globally. WHO goals is that 1 billion more people are enjoying better health and well-being. To achieve the goal of healthier populations, WHO has a holistic approach that entails working across different health-related disciplines to enhance synergies and collaborating with non-health sector actors. WHO actively encourages member states to make commitments for action to improve food systems to enable health diet for the health and well-being of their population under the umbrella of nutrition decade. This will be the key stepping stone looking forward to the UN Food System Summit 2021. I'm confident that powerful collaboration and synergy among the UN agency and other partners will allow us to make great progress to support all countries in the world on the way toward achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. I believe we can succeed, but only by building healthier food systems while ensuring that this transformative shift unfolds in a sustainable way for people and the planet. All actors must collaborate and share responsibility in this endeavor. WHO is looking forward to working with all of you. So thank you very much for your attention. Over to the moderator.
Thank you so much, Dr. Yamamoto. And now we're ready to move to our next segment, the technical presentation by Maximo Torero Cullen, the Chief Economist of FAO. Mr. Torero, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Chair, and let me upload the PowerPoint for the presentation. So I am going to present, as many of you have already seen with the video and on all the comments by all the principals, the state of food insecurity and nutrition in the world, and especially focusing on transforming food systems for affordable, healthy diets. This year, the report brings several innovations. First, we bring new estimates of hunger in the world based on new data. We have updated the population data, the food supply, and new household survey data for 13 countries: Bangladesh, China, Colombia, Ecuador, Ethiopia, Mexico, Mongolia, Mozambique, Nigeria, Pakistan, Peru, Sudan, and Thailand. We also are bringing projections of what the status of food insecurity and nutrition may be in 2030 to see how well we are doing with respect to the SDG 2. We also bring a preliminary effort to estimate the impacts of COVID-19 on food security, which, as many of you have mentioned, is a significant problem today. And finally, we focus our analysis on the cost and affordability of healthy diets and the hidden costs associated with the current consumption patterns. Let me start with the key messages that we are bringing today. First, as it was mentioned by all the speakers, the world hunger is still increasing, up by 10 million people in 1 year and 16 million in 5 years. As the DG of FAO mentioned, this is unacceptable. Looking beyond hunger, over 2 billion people do not have regular access to safe, nutritious, and sufficient food. This means 2 billion people can be facing any other form of malnutrition. The world is not on track to eradicate hunger. In recent trends continue, the number of hungry people will surpass 840 million by 2030, very far from the zero hunger idea. COVID-19 poses a series of threats to food security, and the pandemic may add as 132 million people to the total number of hungry in 2020. The world is not on track to defeat malnutrition. While there is some progress in child stunting and breastfeeding, child overweight is not improving and adult obesity is rising in all the regions of the world. Now, before we start into looking into the details of the numbers, I think it's really important to look at the different concepts we are working. There are two major reports that look at food insecurity and hunger and acute hunger. One is the SOFI report, the one we are launching today, and the other one is the Global Food Crisis Report. In the SOFI report, what we do is we bring what we call chronic undernourishment and another measure similar to chronic undernourishment, which is severe food insecurity. These are long-term inability to meet food requirements, so it's a structural undernourishment. But the Global Food Crisis Report brings what we call crisis level acute food insecurity, which is sporadic. It repeats several times. It comes because of sudden crises that can limit people access to food in short term to the point that their lives and livelihoods are at risk. This is exactly the number that David Beasley mentioned of 270 million people. So this, if it becomes periodic and recursive, of course, we can end in chronic undernourishment. So it's important to understand both types of numbers. And also, we also bring in the SOFI report one additional indicator, which is the one that combines moderate or severe food insecurity together. And is when people face uncertainties about their ability to obtain food and have been forced to compromise on the nutrition quality and quantity of the food they consume. So all these numbers complement to each other. One are structural, and the other one is short-term, which could end in a structural problem if we don't do the policy that WFP does, of course, and FAO also, and other agencies involved in this report, which are essential to respond immediately. Now, what is the situation in terms of the indicator of undernourishment that this report brings, the structural undernourishment? As it has been mentioned, today in 2019, we face 690 million people facing undernourishment, 10 million more than last year, and 60 million more than 10 years ago. And if we continue in this trend, by 2030, we will have 841 million. But where are these undernourished people? 381 million are in Asia, 250 million are in Africa. And here in Africa, the undernourishment has increased between 2014 from 17.4 in prevalence percent to 19.1 in prevalence percent in 2019. In Latin America, we have 48 million people undernourished, and this number has also increased by 9 million between 2014 and 2019. This is, we are in 7.4% of prevalence. So the situation, instead of improving, is worsening, and this is before COVID-19. Now, if the situation continues as it is, what we will be facing between now and 2030 is that Africa will undertake Asia in 2030, accounting for 51.5% of the total undernourishment. As you can see in the graph, in the pie chart, Africa is today 36.4% of the share of the number of undernourishment, and Asia is 55.4. In 2013, with the same trends, Africa will be 51.5% and Asia 39.1. And that's what we need to change. This acceleration in the share of Africa in the levels of undernourishment. It's essential to change this. Now, if we bring and try to simulate the effects of COVID-19 pandemic, using the different scenarios, we have seen the scenarios of the decrease of GDP produced by the World Bank, by the IMF, by OECD. The major additional contribution of the OECD is that they model the double potential wave of COVID-19. So if we combine all these scenarios, we see that there could be an increase between up to 132 million of people moving into undernourishment as a result of what is happening. So between 83 to 132 million, depending on the scenario of GDP decline. And this effect will improve in 2021, but still the improvement won't put us where we were before. So clearly, COVID-19 is bringing a significant impact over undernourishment. And again, this is where we need to respond immediately and where we need to respond as fast as possible. But let me also look to our second indicator, the indicator that uses a survey that we implement. It's like another way to measure undernourishment in the case of severe food insecurity. Why? Because it's important to have alternative sources to be sure that the numbers we are producing are the correct, because our POU is based on official data, microdata that we use to create the POU measure. If we bring the FIES indicator, the food insecurity experience scale, we find that severe food insecurity is 746 million, very close to our POU numbers. But if we add moderate food insecurity, this is people experiencing moderate food insecurity that face uncertainties about their ability to obtain food and have been faced to compromise on the quality and on quantity of their food they consume, the number in total between severe and moderate goes to 2 billion people. And again, that's an enormous number. That's something that we could not afford, and that's something that we need to change. So again, our numbers are extremely consistent across two different indicators, which come from two different completely sources of data. There are serious others of indicators of malnutrition that we need to take into account. And if we look at those indicators of malnutrition, we find that we are not progressing in most of them. Stunted people are under 5, children under 5 stunted are 21.3%, 144 million. Wasted children are 6.9%, 47 million. And overweight is 5.6%, 38.3 million. And is growing across all regions. Now, although on exclusive breastfeeding, we are seeing a progress, and we are seeing that we could achieve the 2025 WHO, World Health Assembly indicator, we won't achieve it by 2030 today. And that's what the orange bar shows here. In none of the indicators, with except of exclusive breastfeeding, that we will achieve by 2025, we will achieve the indicator and the target that we have in place. And especially in the case of obesity, is growing at a very fast rate. Now, one of the core elements of this report is how we resolve this, what solutions we have to resolve this. And for this, we look at three increasing levels of diet quality. We look at the energy sufficient diet, which is the diet that brings the minimum, meets the needs for short-term subsistence. The nutrient adequate diet, which meets the required levels of all essential nutrients. And the healthy diet, which includes, of course, the required nutrients, but also includes foods from several food groups and has greater diversity within food groups. And why we do that? Because we know if we are able to achieve consumers to consume healthy diets, that we will be able to move and to resolve these all forms of malnutrition, which is our core target of the SDG 2. But sadly, when we do this, this is what we found. What we found is that 3 billion people cannot afford those diets. We found the ones in dark red in the map, 75 to 100% of those populations in those countries cannot afford those diets. If we go to the protracted crisis countries that was referred to, 86% of them cannot afford those diets. Healthy diets are 5 times more expensive than energy basic diets. 57% of the population in sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia cannot afford those diets. So we have a huge challenge. We have to resolve this problem. But there are solutions for this. There are things that we can do to change this as fast as possible. And we are trying to bring some ideas on how we can act quickly together with the Food System Summit to be able to resolve these challenges. But not only that, allowing consumers to consume healthy diets also helps to understand better how we can reduce the hidden costs. And in this report, we look at 2 hidden costs. One is the greenhouse gas emissions, and the other one is the health costs. This graph shows how much we will reduce the greenhouse gas emissions if we consume and we change the consumption patterns to healthy diets. Essentially, we will reduce the 1.7 trillion cost per year by 2030 into between 41 and 74%, depending on the type of diet. Each column is a different type of diet. And we look at 4 different types of diets relative to the current consumption. The same applies when we try to bring the non-communicable diseases and all the health costs because of the type of food I eat, where the cost is $1.3 trillion per year by 2030, and the adoption of healthy diets could reduce that by 97%. So clearly, we win not only in terms of health, we win in reducing health costs, and we win in improving our environment. This is the food system approach, taking care of the trade-offs. It's central to take care of the trade-offs. That's what food systems means. So, but there is no one healthy diet, let alone that includes sustainability considerations for every context. Assessing the context-specific barriers managing short-term and long-term trade-offs and exploiting synergies will be critically to achieve such a success. But what to do? And let me finalize with this. There are several policies that we can do even without increasing our costs. For example, policy and incentives towards nutrition-sensitive investment. Today, most of the incentives are towards starchy foods, towards cereals. We can switch those and create the proper incentives to promote the more production of healthy products and diversity of diets. We can also look across the supply chain and, for example, try to reduce food losses, which are enormous, and COVID-19 will exacerbate that. And there is a huge opportunity to reduce those and increase the efficiency across the value chains. We can improve international trade, increase efficiency, and also national and intra-regional trade. How? By improving food safety. Again, food safety standards is something that we can do. Doesn't mean more money, means to do it so that we can achieve what we want. We can bring nutritional sensitive social protection. It's not only to give access to cash, it's not only to give access to food, it's giving access to healthy diets. And today that our farmers will have surpluses because of the recession, is an opportunity to bring those surpluses and to put them in the market so that this diversity of diets are more available. We can improve and bring knowledge to consumer to create a behavioral change. And that's linked also to waste. Consumers need to understand what they are eating and need to make the proper choices. And we need to pursue the entire partners with low impact on health and the environment. So these things can be done and not necessarily imply enormous amount of money. It implies a transformation of the way we produce, a transformation of our food system. So urgent action is needed to support a shift that makes healthy diets affordable to all. The shift needs to unfold in a sustainable way for people and the planet, and to create the synergies to support progress on the SDGs. We need to create the change now. We cannot wait anymore, and we cannot continue saying it's unacceptable. Let's act now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that overview of the report findings, Mr. Torero. Let's see if we can unpack those policy options with the high-level panel now with our heads of the partner agencies that have produced this report. I'm pleased to welcome back to our floor here, Dr. Chu Dong-yu, Director General of FAO, Mr. Gilbert Hungbo, President of IFAD, Ms. Henrietta Fore, Executive Director of UNICEF, Mr. David Beasley, Executive Director of WFP, and Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, Assistant Director General of WHO. So let's get this conversation started. I'll start to Dr. Chu from FAO. So the SOFI report confirms that the number of chronically undernourished or hungry people continues to rise, up to 10 million people in 2019 and by nearly 60 million in the last 5 years. With the economic recession caused by COVID, those numbers could get even worse, with 83 to 132 million more in chronic hunger this year alone. So when do you think we'll see this surge in hunger and malnutrition? And which regions do you think are the most vulnerable? And what can we do to prevent this?
It's a little bit big question. I want to get a simply think of it. Solution. What is solution? I think, of course, as David Beasley said, I'm not that optimistic. You know, the current situation might be it's still not reached the bottom line. Still going worse and worse. We didn't see the worst situation so far. You can say after the pandemic. What is the pandemic still on development? That's one. Second, what is the solution for this, for the most vulnerable people? The region you already mentioned, as Maxima mentioned, in Africa, Sahara region, just before we joined with the Henrietta Fore, another Sahara retreat meeting, before we joined this meeting, and also South Asia. So it's a holistic design for the national development. You need the holistic design of national development. And consider the food, not only food, it's basic human rights, it's a regional development, and of course, it's a social movement. That's a second thought. Third, we need the education, science-based education. And my colleague from WHO, from SUN, I saw the also SUN movement is here. And also, that's why I especially invited the chairperson of CFS. We have to, from a family, from a school, from a university, from a society, we need to educate people and consumers how to respect food, how to respect what it is nutritional food. Yeah, and then you can mostly agent want to reduce the food waste in the developed nation, in the city, and also another, we have to reduce the food loss to offer the infrastructure, offer enough cold chain system and the post-harvest treatment properly. So that's a three big thoughts, but of course I can keep continue, and since I have so many colleagues here. But last, not least, action now by yourself, from your individual consumers, from individual family, from individual organization. That's why FAO, when I went to the cafeteria, I put a lot of advertisement asking my colleague to put out no food waste, no food, no anyone millet, no anyone rice, or no anyone loaf of the bread left. Do yourself, action yourself first. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Yes, I could not agree more about the coordinated action from both the individual to the global level. If we could please now turn to Mr. Hungbo from IFAD. So much of this report is based on diets. Could you explain the role of small-scale producers in providing food that is healthy, nutritious, and sustainable, and how can we actually support them while also reducing their own vulnerability to hunger?
Thank you so much. I think, first of all, it's important for us to record that we have about 500 million small-scale producers around the world. And 50% of the diet in the whole world is produced by those small-scale producers. At the same time, we know, particularly the indigenous people, already 80% of the biodiversity in terms of species are within them. And secondly, the small-scale producers, not only their practices are very likely much more friendly, if I may use the term, to the global sustainability issue compared to the intensive agriculture, let's face it. So the combination of both food production, sustainability, and economic, it is better if we were to be able to support them in their production. On the flip side, we do know, as I mentioned earlier, we do know that the challenge they have is their vulnerability to shocks, the difficulty in accessing to local or national markets, let alone the international markets, and the storage facility or the basic transformation. So where we do need to support them is, first of all, providing investment. If we really, as you said it, if you really want to WFP to be out of business, we really need to invest in long-term sustainable development dimension for the small-scale holders, be it from the production side, but also in building the infrastructure at the rural level, and as well as investment in what I would call the soft side. And this is what Massimo in his presentation was referring to, i.e. a basic social protection that will help building up the resilience of the small-scale farmers. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Hungbo, for being the voice of the small-scale producers. If we can now turn to Mr. Beasley from WFP. So Mr. Beasley, with COVID, it's estimated that the number of acutely hungry people may increase to up to 270 million people by the end of this year alone. How do you think COVID is impacting nutrition, and what can we do to mitigate this?
It's mute.
Oh, thank you. So it's a tremendous impact, as you can imagine. You know, I made this comment not long ago that when COVID was hitting the United States, for example, people were panic buying and you couldn't even get toilet paper at the grocery store. And, you know, if that's happening in one of the most sophisticated supply chain systems in the world, what do you think is going to be happening in nations that are struggling on a day-to-day basis? And that's what we're facing all over the world. And this is why we've been stepping up. And we'll be moving, as I said earlier, from 100 million to 138 million people that we want to support. But as you have lockdowns and supply chain disruptions around the world, and particularly in urban areas now, it's absolutely critical that we have safety net programs put in place. And this is why we're partnering with UNICEF and FAO and WHO, et cetera, to make certain that we do everything that we possibly can. Compound that, though, with the fact that schools around the world have been shut down. It was 1.6, 1.7 billion children no longer in school. It's now about 1.2 billion children are no longer in school. 370 million of those children receive a meal at school. And many of those children, that's the only meal they get per day. So imagine if those children are not getting that one nutritious meal a day, how their nutritious and healthcare system internally will deteriorate, which means they're going to be more vulnerable to COVID, to the measles, to malaria, and to many other infectious diseases. And so what we've been doing is working with our suppliers, working with our donors to pre-position food, particularly in these vulnerable areas. In fact, we've got of our donors about $2 billion that we asked to advance so we can pre-position food in strategic locations all over the world. Because when disruption starts taking place and pricing food items start spiking, we are already on the ground saving money, saving lives, and already made a big impact. However, this is what's a very big concern, because we are already short of the monies that we would need to reach the number of people that we are talking about in terms of food insecurity increasing. That was before COVID. So our operating budget last year, we raised about 8.4 billion. So we need another couple $1 billion. Well, here comes COVID, compounding economic deterioration. So we can't take from the hunger pandemic to pay for the COVID pandemic. Otherwise, people will die from starvation. So we've got to really balance this out and really thread that needle so that we can work both at the same time to maximize safety net programs, maximize or minimize the disruption of supply chains. And I can keep going on and on and on because there's so much taking place. And let me just add this one last comment too, because not many people realize that we're the logistics backbone for the United Nations, for the humanitarian world. And so we are out there because the airline industry has all but shut down, as you can imagine. And so you can't get COVID supplies, you can't get a lot of medical supplies out there. And so we've been picking up that tab, working with the different agencies in partnership, and we've been delivering supplies to about 138 nations just in the last few weeks. But we've got to have money to move these supplies, whether it's testing kits, masks, ventilators, and the list goes on. And we're running out of money just for that. And so this is a critical time that nations must step up. They must reach deep into the pockets. Otherwise, we're going to have mass starvation and a lot of significant other issues.
Thank you so much. I could not agree more on your point about just the need to make sure that these efforts are coordinated given the incredible pressures on budgets these days. So, and especially your point on schools being such a nexus for nutrition and social and emotional support for all of our children around the world. That the 1.6 billion number of school children being disrupted, their lives being disrupted, I think has hit many of us. So a critical point. Thank you. Now, if we can move to Dr. Yamamoto from WHO, which regions in the world are most affected by malnutrition? And what do you think is needed to get the world back on track to reach those SDG 2 targets on malnutrition?
Thank you for your question. I should say all regions in the world are affected in the malnutrition, but Mr. Toledo has already shown us the data that the African and South Asian bear the greatest share of the all form of the malnutrition by accounting the more than 9 out of 10 all stunted children and West children in that region. But when we talk about overweight and obesity, almost all regions facing the challenges, the issues. And we all share that we are not on the track to achieve the SDG2 goal. SDG2 goals, what we have to do, I should say 2 issues. Holistic approach first. Rather than we approach the individual form of the malnutrition separately, because since all forms of the malnutrition share the common drivers, so we need to take a holistic approach to do it. Second issue is systematic approach, especially for the food system approach, to allow the people to come up with a sustainable diet, sustainable healthy diet. And on addition to that, when we talk about COVID-19, I cannot agree more that the WFP representative said that in his statement that in the ground level, many health sectors right now struggling to provide primary health care services together with COVID-19 responses. So how we can make good balance to support community to provide both. We need to create good balance. Otherwise, many children and women and also the all population will be enter the malnutrition come more severe. Let me stop here. Thank you. You are mute.
Yes, I'm so sorry. My apologies. Moving on to Ms. Four from UNICEF. I think we do know that we are not on track to achieve those 2030 targets. So in your mind, what are the best bets we have to accelerate action towards ending malnutrition for children?
Thank you very much, Lana. Well, you know, it's a difficult moment because we know that we are not meeting the SDGs and that we have lots of work to do from each one of our standpoints, whether we're government or whether we're a business or whether we're a young person or whether we're a family. We all have something that we need to improve. And so part of it is that we need to reimagine how we're going to work together. We've been taking it for granted that somehow our food systems would all adjust and that we would be able to feed everyone and to make sure that there was access to the right types of food. But it's just not happening. So let me mention a couple of areas that I think under the SDGs that we're really missing. So one is low birth weight rates. So Maximo's charts were clear that we are just not making much change in this. It hasn't changed much in the last 2 decades. So why is that? Some of it is that there's suboptimal diets for mothers, and many of the mothers are adolescent mothers, and many of them are in South Asia or in Africa. And Africa demographics just are not keeping up with this, so that Africa would actually have to triple the pace at which it's moving. So we've got to be more innovative, more creative on how we can do this ourselves. The stunting numbers have gone down, but once again, it's going to be very hard for Africa, given its demographics, to be able to keep up with that downward trend. Then you look at things like wasting. David Beasley made an impassioned plea for school meals. They're very important. We will have a lasting effect on children. Child malnutrition is up. And then what about the children who aren't lucky enough to be in school and they never get a school meal? So they're even more at risk. And then for many adolescents, by the time they are in adolescenthood, they're not eating healthily. They're not making the choices. And as a result, their nutrition is not good enough. So we all need to do something different. We're off track. And we need to gather the data so we know where the children are that are the most malnutrition. We need to know where the communities are that need the greatest amount of food. But we're going to have to do this ourselves. The pandemic has shown us that there is enormous generosity in our world, but it just cannot do so many urgent issues at the same time. We're falling back in all of our indicators. So this group needs to come up with innovative solutions that are public and private. And I see many of the member states who have solved this in their own countries. We need to now do this everywhere in the world. So that's how I think we're going to do it. Thank you, Lana.
Thank you, Henrietta, for that plea for innovation and creativity and collaboration. We are in this together, so the only way we'll solve it is to come together. And so now if I can go back to Dr. Chu, the report stresses that having enough to eat is important, but what people eat needs to also be nutritious. So tackling this affordability issue is really key to this whole nexus of hunger and malnutrition. What do you think is driving the high cost of nutritious foods, and what can be done so that a healthy diet can be affordable to everyone?
For the food, fundamental root cause, we should have the developing nation to develop. That's the meaning of UN and international organizations we are working for. So help the vulnerable, poor people to develop, to increase their income. Second, we have to produce food with low cost of the raw materials. That's we need the innovation. New varieties, high productivities, and you name it, high process efficiency, whatever. Third, affordability. Also, that's why in March, I encourage the ministers of agriculture on the G20 summit. We have to encourage people, especially from developed nations, smallholder farmers, produce more and better to shorter supply chain. Yeah, if you can short supply chain, it's friendly to environment, and also you can get less dependence. And the third and the fourth, we have to keep international trade open and sustainable, because that's the meaning of big farmers in the world. They can produce a high volume with international standard, with innovation, and with a vast land. So they can supply the larger volume of commodities. But for perishable vegetables and fruit and all those products, even some fish, you have to produce locally by aquaculture or by horticulture. So I think for affordable, first you have to increase income. Second, you have to reduce improve the efficiency, whole value chain, supply chain, and production. And the third, we have to reduce the waste and the loss. That's what I always said. Because my grandma always told me, don't waste the food, even you are poor. But now a lot of people are rich. Look the restaurant in the city. I was really astonished. 1 kilo of food you waste, you will create 10 times more environmental impact, negative impact. And people talk about day and day about the environment. But why don't you zero food waste in the city and improve the food loss in the countryside who produce food? That's a solution. And last, not least, I think education. I said, that's my, even now I have enough money to buy everything, but I never waste my food. So start with your child. When you started the independent feeding by yourself, no food waste. Again, education. So last, policy. Should be charging extra tax for the food waste in some day. I encourage the member countries, if they can take leading, especially in Europe. You are a developed nation. You have to take leading examples. And then that's a way we can really offer the affordable, low price food to the vulnerable people who need. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chu. If I can tell you, I'm Chinese too, and my grandmother and mother and father encouraged me to eat every last grain of rice in my bowl. So I think zero hunger, zero waste mantra is certainly something that must be respected. Your point on education as well is certainly well taken. It all starts there. All of these SDGs, education is really a central pillar for all of that. So I hope we can move forward. Moving on to Mr. Hongbo Ifad, the voice of the small-scale producer. Can you tell us how COVID-19 is impacting small-scale producers, and how do you think that they can help the pandemic from increasing the numbers of hungry in the world?
Listen, if you look at the statistic of the pandemic from a health perspective, we do know that the situation within the small-scale producers in the rural area is not necessarily the worst. But when you look at the economic impact, that's where you realize it doesn't matter which data you take, they are always at the bottom, particularly the rural women and girls, which is one. We know clearly that the pandemic has had a negative impact on accessing to the seed or the fertilizer for the planting season, or on the flip side, for the fruit and vegetable producers, because of shortage of farm workers and inaccessibility of markets because of the lockdown or the international closing of the borders, all of that has really caused their meager income to just go down. And as a consequence, a lot of our small-scale farmers have problem to even pay their monthly debts to the microcredit or local financial institution. So the economic and the social impact is quite huge, particularly in countries where you have at least 60% of the population in the rural area, where agriculture is up to 25% of the GDP, and it's so huge that we got to really have a specific focus for those smallholders. So it doesn't matter how you look at it. One of my worries is we look at the pandemic just from a health and humanitarian perspective. It is important to bring the humanitarian and the health perspective with the development, with the long-term investment. We cannot insist enough. And when we elaborate the plan with the countries that all of us in the system we are helping, it's important to make sure that the rural communities, the smallholders, 1 or 2 hectares, are not left behind in that global plan. And again, my last word will be building resilience, not only in agriculture, farm or non-farm activities, but in all related economic and social parameters in the rural area, namely the point touched on by Henrietta from UNICEF, or the one touched by David and Dong Yu. You look at that from the rural setting, even if you are able to increase the production, but the kids cannot go to school, or you're able to keep the production and you get back home and there's no potable water, those basic, we need to look at that from an integrative and a comprehensive perspective as well. Over.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hungbo. Resilience seems to be a word that comes up again and again across sectors in the news at all times, because that's clearly what this pandemic and all these crises have revealed to us, that the issue of resilience must be a priority. So thank you for that. Mr. Beasley, one of the most sobering statistics from the report is that 3 billion number. 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet. So where do we even start to tackle this issue and the consequences, and how can we support the poorest?
You know, when you look at that number, it's almost like throw your hands up in the air and say, oh my gosh, why bother? But we've been making a lot of progress, and the progress being made by agencies working together. I know with UNICEF and FAO and EFAN, the things that we do together, and WHO, and I can go from country to country to country. But again, having said that, in the last few years, we're going in the wrong direction, primarily because of man-made conflict. That's a whole issue by itself. But one of the things that we're fixated on is that even if we get a humanitarian dollar, how do we take a humanitarian dollar and convert it into a community improvement project? And like Gilbert Hungbo was talking about, the smallholder farmers, you're never going to solve these problems we're talking about without engaging the smallholder farmers and the private sector. I do believe for too long the UN shunned the private sector, but you see a whole different attitude today. How do we integrate the private sector into these issues? Because the private sector has a lot of experience and expertise, and we've got to convince the private sector that, you know what, maybe you need to have a little bit less return on your investment so that we can have sustainability and resilience, come in and partner with us, working with smallholder farmers. And it's amazing the different response that I know I'm receiving today, talking with major CEOs around the world that realize, you know, we are in this together. How do we work together more strategically? Last year alone, working with our beneficiaries, because people can talk about, well, what's causing the climate to change? Well, while you're debating that, poor people are being devastated by droughts and flash floods and tornadoes and hurricanes and cyclones. And so they can't wait on that long-term big solution. So we come in with our programs to say, all right, let's rehabilitate the land so that you can have your own crops, so you don't need that outside support, so you won't be vulnerable to the ISIS and the Al-Qaedas and all the different extreme elements within the area. And so last year alone, we rehabilitated with beneficiaries like 500,000 acres of land. Millions of trees were planted, literally thousands of miles of feeder roads built, along with holding ponds and reservoirs, and the list goes on, because smallholder farmers are the backbone. I mean, they are critical. And so, unfortunately, when we would like 3 years ago, when I felt like we were really 4 years ago, we were making so much progress, and now we seem to be going backwards. I was hopeful that our big debate of the day today would be boy, we got to get nutrition up for everybody. But quite frankly, now we're struggling just to provide the energy for people to survive and live. And that is not a good situation. We can't go backwards continuously. We've got to move forward. We've got to engage the private sector. We've got to empower the smallholder farmers. We've got to continue to work with the governments and hold them accountable. And the major donor nations have got to come together more strategically and not be one. And I've talked with this about many. I know Henrietta's heard me talk about this before, but sometimes you'll have some of our donor nations, they'll do a project in a country, and another donor nation will do another project in a different part of the country. I think our donor nations have got to come together more strategically and be more comprehensive in how we approach solutions going forward, because we've got too much piecemealing going on, and we don't have time for that now. We've got to be comprehensive, collaborative, to maximize the limited dollars that we do have. If we do that, we can minimize the suffering and maximize the success stories. Over.
I sure hope so. I sure hope so. That integrated approach is absolutely essential when the donor dollars are scarce in this crazy, crazy moment. Moving on to Dr. Yamamoto. So given the focus of this year's report is on healthy diets, what is a healthy diet and why is it important for people's health and well-being? Can you give any concrete examples from your work at WHO?
Yeah, thank you very much, Lana, your question. First of all, regarding the healthy diet, the exact makeup of the healthy diet varies different, depend on the person's specific need and the context of the specific factor. However, the basic component of what constitutes of the healthy diet are the same. Basic component of healthy diets are optimal breastfeeding practice in the first 2 years, the diversity and abundance of fruits and vegetables, whole grains and fibers, nuts and seeds. And third, is modest amount of animal source of foods, minimum amounts of processed meats, and minimum amounts of food and beverages high in sugar, energy, saturated fat, trans fat, or salt. The malnutrition includes a nutrition disorder caused by deficient intake of the energy or nutrition, such as stunting or wasting, and micronutrients deficiency. But it also includes excessive or imbalanced intake, leading overweight or obesity, and diet-related NCD. So both categories of malnutrition are caused by unhealthy diet, and they can be interlinked. The health impact associated with unhealthy diet are significant. For example, unhealthy diet are responsible for over 10 million NCD deaths every year. Of course, unhealthy diet linked with children development, mental, physical development, or healthy and independence of aging people, or it's linked with healthy pregnancy and health delivery of the healthy children. So it's very close linked with the entire health and entire lives and well-being for people. And WHO, we, together with all partners agency, we create a good guideline to follow the people to keep the healthy diet. And we had some good innovative relationship with the private sector, how we can create a good partnership, innovative way, a positive way. That's also very important. But at the same time, other public sector, sometimes we have to create a good environment to access healthy diet, including the labeling of the foods or sometimes taxation with, for to create a good environment for the people to select healthy diet or a more healthy way to eat. So this is some combination of all major tools together. But again, this is a political leadership together with all public people partnership to do it. Over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Yamamoto, for that reminder about the holistic links between a healthy diet, healthy people, healthy minds, and also the private sector point that keeps coming up again and again. So hopefully we can get private sector players in this space even more so. Moving on to Ms. Four from UNICEF. We've already talked about the affordability issue as a real major barrier to achieving our nutrition goals. But what actions from your point of view can government and other stakeholders like the private sector take to make quality diets more affordable to the most vulnerable families and children?
Thank you, Lana. That's a really important question, because if families can access affordable, nutritious food, then we will change nutrition on the planet. So here are a few thoughts and ideas. One is, there's been a discussion here, and David and Gilbert and Dong-Yu all mentioned it, in which we've been talking about humanitarian and development. So often we separate these two worlds, but in food systems, they really are one. When you plant the seeds in one, they can bear fruit in the next. So humanitarian and development assistance should be looked at as one continuum if we can. If we do as member states, then you begin to look at, Gilbert mentioned water being essential. It is. In the Sahel and in the Horn, with WFP and FAO, we're working on resilience. It is the #1 request that most governments have of us. So that would be one, the humanitarian to development. The second is, several of our panel have talked about cash transfers. There are now 40 countries in the time of COVID who have now put in cash transfer systems for the poorest and most vulnerable families. That is an important change, and it's something that can be done now. It's a question of making room in budgets, but that really does help. There's one more area that we have seen, and Gilbert hinted at it, which is that we need young farmers. Young people are going into urban centers. They don't want to be farmers and shareholder farmers because it's not seen as glamorous or making enough money. But in this moment, we need local food producers. So Generation Unlimited and many of our jobs encouragement programs at the United Nations, we really need to encourage young farmers, and private companies can help in how to grow food and trying to make it something that you want to do as a young person. The second group that we need help from is private sector. Clearly, private sector can help in driving down costs and being very innovative about how to move food to the best places. David mentioned about maybe taking lower margins, but getting bigger scale, higher revenues. That's what we need to talk to companies about. And then there's some very special ones for us at UNICEF, like breast milk. Breast milk substitutes are just not as good for a child. So if companies can stand by the regulations and the legislation, if they can promote good nutrition and breast milk, that will help nutrition worldwide to get children off to a good start. And then lastly, families. So just like Dong-Yu and you, Lana, my parents said that I had to eat every ounce of food that was on my plate because there were other children that were starving. We can't waste food, but we need children and young people to understand food so that they want to eat nutritious food, that they're educated about it, because if they don't eat it, if they don't buy it when they're an adolescent, we will not have improved our world. So we need to encourage that and do this as a big family. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Four. So many great ideas in there with the cash transfer systems in the 40 countries and the need for young farmers, the youth voice in all of this, and private sector to take us to scale. So now I think we can open the floor to our question and answer session. This is our final segment and your chance to ask questions. If I can please remind speakers to refrain from making speeches, as we'd really like to focus the time on questions. So we ask you to limit your interventions to 1 minute. And if you can direct your questions to the heads of agencies or to the FAO Chief Economist, Mr. Torero. So we'll try to have as many questions as we can addressed during this segment. We've had a stream of questions coming through on the chat. So I do apologize in advance if we don't get to everyone. But please do refer to the report itself, which is already uploaded, and there are many resources available on all of the partner websites. So we have had some requests already. I would like to first start this segment by giving the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Emanuela Del Rey, Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Cooperation of Italy, and Chair of the Group of Friends of Food Security and Nutrition. We thank Italy for leading this important group in New York.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I'm not supposed to ask a question. I would rather share my views on this very important topic. I see so many friends sitting around the table, and Italy being a leader in this particular field and fighting so strongly against hunger, and especially for food security, of course, wants to express its opinion. Of course, as everybody else, I look forward for the day in which SOFI report will commend our efforts and celebrate the eradication of world hunger. Of course, we are aware of the fact that addressing the increased frequency of food crisis means reinforcing food systems as a way to increase prevention and resilience. Fragile context and links between peace and security, climate change, health challenges, socioeconomic issues, and food insecurity are visible everywhere. However, we also have positive praxis to replicate, such as sustainable supply chains, agroecology approach, smart agriculture and water management, biodiversity, and health IELTS. The Italian development cooperation approach is based on reinforcing the humanitarian development nexus, creating resilient food systems, and strengthening supply chains. SDG 2 is a top priority of our developmental policy, and we keep working, of course, with FAO, IFAD, and the World Food Programme to make food security and nutrition a priority in the international agenda. We showed our commitment in the G7 when we drew the international community attention to what kind of impact the pandemic would have on food security. And next year we will continue to do so, especially working in this framework within the G20 presidency, which it is led by Italy, and at global level by supporting the Food Coalition. We also look forward to the upcoming 2021 Food System Summit, which will be a momentous event we must take advantage of with an open mind by including all relevant stakeholders and their new ideas based on scientific evidence and creativity. Let me say once more, only working together we can really make it and prepare for a sustainable future. We are called to action, governments, development agencies, organization of the civil society and the private sector. We will not make it unless we create and support groundbreaking partnerships with the private sector, especially at local level, which are crucial to attract the investments the world so desperately needs. Dissemination of sustainable farming, improving quality and quantity of production, promoting the entrepreneurial role of rural women, assisting in establishing cooperatives and associations, empowering women and youth. These are concrete best practices. However, we need to reach out to more and more people. We need to create a movement of thought and action that would involve and recognize the role of more and more partners to achieve our ultimate goal, a world without hunger. We as Italians recognize the importance of the environment in high quality food production. When we talk about made in Italy, for instance, we imply also the Mediterranean diet, declared by UNESCO Intangible Heritage, which was shaped, the Mediterranean diet, by centuries-old tradition flourishing in a biodiverse environment. We feel that sharing our experience and our approach to healthy diets and safety of food production is a moral duty and an essential part of our cooperation with all the partners. Let me conclude by saying that we must develop a common language, a new narrative, creating the building blocks of resilience and preventing the next food crisis, and prevention is the most important thing, is all about scaling up our efforts through partnerships, global strategies and innovation, to which we remain deeply committed. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Her Excellency. And now if we have a request from the US Ambassador Kip Tom, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, moderator, for the floor. As we've learned today, the SOFI report shows acute malnutrition and hunger are on a catastrophic rise, while we are facing numerous devastating threats to food security, pest, conflict, climate, the ongoing pandemic, and the lack of access to innovation for farmers to increase resiliency and capacity. So today, the SOFI numbers do not give us any reason to become complacent. In fact, quite the contrary. So my question to the RBA heads, how will you ensure the statistics in this report do not weaken the urgency to act? We need increased donor support managed efficiently and effectively to help the estimated 270 million people who will experience acute hunger by the end of this year. And ultimately, how will your organizations address the increased need and bring this number down to improve lives and save lives? Thank you, moderator, for the floor.
Thank you so much, Ambassador. I now would like to pass the floor to the Netherlands. We have a request from Ms. Carola van Rijnshoever, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Kingdom of the Netherlands and Director of the Inclusive Green Growth Department. You have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you so much for all presentations today. My great appreciation and congratulations to the agencies and their hard-working staff behind this report. It is really deeply concerning that already since 2014, hunger is on the rise. We are simply nowhere near where we want to be. And amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, it is all the more important to raise the attention for this enduring food crisis, as it is unfortunately exacerbated by COVID-19, with its market access failures and its reduced purchasing power, as well as, of course, the locust plague. And this can only inspire us to take stronger action to eradicate hunger. And as the Secretary General said, we must make healthy diets accessible and affordable for everyone. We must accelerate our efforts to achieve SDG 2, while at the same time delivering for SDGs 3, health, and 13, climate action, among others. And the COVID-19 pandemic unfortunately sets us back, while at the same time reducing the time left to achieve the SDGs. Therefore, we really feel we must design together smarter solutions at scale. This should be our main concern while preparing for the upcoming Food System Summit. And as the Netherlands, we aim to contribute to this by bringing private, scientific, NGO, financial, and governmental stakeholders all together. We need political commitment and strong and innovative partnerships, localizing responses and solutions to make progress towards achieving SDG 2 faster. As the Netherlands, we also contribute by investing more in food security in developing countries directly. I'm very happy to note that my government, in response to the pandemic, just last Friday decided to invest more in development cooperation in the field of food security. Firstly, by upping the investments in WASH for safe nutrition. You need access to water. Secondly, by investing more in social safety nets. And thirdly, by collaborating much more strongly to keep local supply chains open, particularly for nutritious foods. The Food System Summit next year really provides us with an opportunity to galvanize smarter cooperation to deliver healthy, affordable, and sustainable diets to everyone. And we should aim, we feel, for three things at this summit. Firstly, to design a much improved science policy interface in support of actionable agendas. Secondly, to work together more closely with all stakeholders, especially also with those from the private sector. And thirdly, to show examples of how a system-wide approach across countries delivers progress along the entire food value chain. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And we do thank the Netherlands for their leadership on this issue and many more. I see a raised hand from Argentina. If you could please identify yourself, and you have the floor. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you very much, Lana. I would like to express thanks for the very high-level presentations. I truly appreciate those presentations, as well as all the work behind them, and your work, Lana, as moderator, which is also excellent. If I may, I would like to ask Maximo Torero a question. Bearing in mind that Latin America and the Caribbean are now the epicenter of COVID-19, if possible, I would like for you to give us a summary of what is forecast in terms of the impact on food security as a consequence of the pandemic on Latin America and the Caribbean. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Muchas gracias. If I can now turn to Ms. Carla Montesi, the Director of DevCo, People and Planet.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And first of all, from the European Commission, really congratulations for this report. Many thanks. It's really very interesting and more than ever in this crucial period of COVID. As you know, this is a report that we as European Commission, we always look out for. Let me just make 3 points in comments. The first is that unfortunately, this report confirmed the recent negative trends that continue. This report also points out that Africa is the continent where food security challenges will be the biggest in the year to come. So let me just say that the European Union, we are reorienting our cooperation program and will enhance our focus in Africa. So could be a way forward. Second comment is that, of course, the report underlines very clearly the essential information about the cost and the benefit of health diets. This really call for continued investment in nutrition improvement. Let me say that also this is a message that in the European Union will certainly listen to. The third comment, this report also clearly mentioned that in order to solve the problem of food security and nutrition, we need a broad food system approach. And this is also what the European Union Commission realized when we presented just 2 months ago the European Farm to Fork strategy. With this strategy, we call, as in your report, really for a shift in thinking by looking at the food system in their entirety, from farm the point that we would like to mention, the point in which we would like to work on with all the partners around the world during the UN Food System Summit. So we really look forward to the UN Food System Summit preparation, and we are ready to engage in the preparatory process with all the UN agencies. So thanking once again for this interesting report and also for the agenda for action that is proposing. Thank you very much. And once again, congratulations.
Thank you very much. And my apologies, lo siento mucho, to the Ambassador of Argentina. I realize you asked a question to our chief economist. So if I can please give the floor to Maximo to answer the question.
Thank you very much, Lana. And let me be brief. As we mentioned, in the case of Latin America, the report is showing that 48 million people are in undernourishment, and there is an increase of 9 million with respect to 2014, which means that Latin America, which was a region that was constantly improving, is not in the case right now. And this is taking place in the middle of the COVID-19, which will worsen the situation. Why is so important in the case of the region? It's because the region is one of the key exporters also of food, of basic staple food. Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, Paraguay is a key exporter to the world, and also is a key exporter of high value commodities to the world. And what they will be facing in the future is lower prices because of the recession as a result of COVID-19. And that will affect producers and will also affect the income of the people in the countries. And what we are seeing is that the rates of decrease of GDP growth in that region are significantly low. You have countries like Peru facing minus 12.5 GDP growth decline, Brazil minus 9%, Argentina significant decrease in GDP growth. So the region will be significantly affected, not only in the rural areas, but also in the urban areas because of lack of jobs and unemployment that will be results as a consequence of COVID-19. So there is a lot of work that needs to be done to turn this around, because we cannot allow that this region fails, given that it's a huge supplier of food to the world too. Thank you. You are muted, Lana.
My apologies. Thank you. If I can please now recognize Ms. Gerda Verberg, who is the coordinator of the Sun Movement.
Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And first of all, I'd like to commend the 5 UN organizations for the excellent report, and also you, Maximo, and all the people from all organizations involved, because I really appreciate the substance, not because of the direction, because the direction is a regrettable direction, but a lot has been said. I appreciate the report because it also comes with a level of strategic and innovative approaches. So I'd like to make 5 remarks and focus a little bit on how to take this report, how to use this report and make the business case for improving food systems, meanwhile fighting hunger and malnutrition, and invest in people and the planet alike. First of all, I would like to mention one of the findings, that investing in healthy and nutritious diets will decrease the about 97% of direct and indirect health costs, and it will reduce greenhouse gas emissions from between 41 and 71% by 2030. This is a huge win, and this is the turnaround of making food systems, if they are reformed, part of the solutions. And that brings me to the message of, and my second message, the message of Secretary General Guterres, and it resonated in the contributions of all 5 principles of the UN organizations. And he was pointing at SDG 2 in making healthy diets affordable and available. This comes with an investment, because the Secretary General had to report that country governments on average were investing in agriculture and food production 0.42% of their national budgets by 2021. In 2018, it was even less. It has gone down towards to 0.28%. Now, if you want to invest in your country, in your society, in your people, including children and women, you need to invest in food systems. because if you invest in food systems and nutrition, they will be ready to also invest in the climate and in natural resources. So it comes with an investment, but this investment is more than worthwhile. My third remark is about is resonating what has been said by the Director General of FAO and by Henrietta Fore. It is that there is a need to step out of our comfort zones, and for everyone, and think out of the box. But I think the thinking out of the box is there. There's a lot of reports, and if we could solve problems on paper, we would have solved already all the problems that are around the world. It is people who need to be ready to step out of their comfort zone and make the unthinkable coalitions thinkable, and building coalitions to work together, to make collaboration happen between those who never have collaborated before. Let me mention a few there. When it comes to food, it's not only agriculture and health, it is indeed education, social protection, but also environment and the climate. It is natural resources, it is water, it is biodiversity. They all need to come together at country level, and to make this happen, the global systems, and very often they are operating still in silos. Look at the diverse number of summits. They need to be ready to come together, join forces, find solutions that can be implemented at country level, because the sustainable development goals are driven by countries, and at country level you need to find the solutions. So at country level, the different departments, indeed including education and economic affairs and development, and health and food, need to come together and work together in a multi-sectoral way. But then you also need to be guided in one way or the other. And then I would like to emphasize what has been said by the chair of the Committee on World Food Security. They are doing a great job in developing voluntary guidelines for countries in a multi-sectoral way to guide the transformation towards food systems that are nutritious and at the same time sustainable. And that's not the same. You need to invest in both, as is made clear also in this excellent SOFI report. So my call to action is to all actors and players: please work, collaborate on these voluntary guidelines, because they are able to guide what needs to happen at country level, and then align at global level. Do it, and that's my final point, do it from the country level, and do not exclude anyone. Several people have pointed on the role that the private sector has to play. Yes, in the food system, we cannot do without the private sector, but we need to invite them to the table, not to decide what has to be done, but to make them co-responsible for preventing and ending all forms of malnutrition under the conditions that they are serving society and the planet, people and the planet alike. It doesn't help to lock the door to them anymore. They are part of the problem, but let us make the condition that they have to behave as part of the solution. Finally, final remark. There is always a trade-off in transformation. Let me echo what has been said by Gilbert Umbo and Henrietta Fore, that we do not take the risk that the most vulnerable, the farmers, the women, the children, the poor people in general, are paying for the payoff of the transformation of food systems. So let's make sure that we protect the most vulnerable once we start to collaborate to change food systems at the country level, from the country perspective, and bring all commitments together at the global level, preferably during the Food Systems Summit, but also during the Nutrition for Growth Summit organized by the government of Japan, December next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that inspirational call to action. If I may now recognize the Ambassador of Iran in Rome, I believe your hand is raised.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you very much for your moderation, and thanks for such a high quality SOFI report. And I really, it was shaking, as it was mentioned by my colleagues, the trends, the numbers, and also the negative trends toward much more hunger and much more malnutrition for future is a real wake-up call. But according to what my colleagues mentioned, if we want to switch, my question is that if we want to switch this wake-up call to a call for action, of course, we need to have a political will and a strong commitment by the politician in one phase, which is very important. And my question is that how can we are going to translate this wake-up call to a call for action? One side is a politician that needs to make much more stronger commitment and stronger will. And second, of course, is professionals to have more innovative, creative approach, as it was discussed by the majority of members, that we cannot go with the business as usual, and we cannot continue actually the same path that we were doing. Therefore, we need a innovative approach for do, and of course, for the people, for the private sector, for all partners, we need further collaboration and cooperation among all to have more solidarity. Without working together, of course, we cannot make this wake-up call to a call for action. My question is that to raise these three pillars, to have a real action and a real action plan for future, what is the plan and how can we use this information, which are very, very valuable for actually a plan for action and for politicians, for professionals, and also for people. Thank you. Back to you, Lana.
Thank you so much. How can we change this call, wake-up call to a call to action? So if the principals would like to take that on board, I may start with Dr. Chu. Would you like to take that question on board?
Yeah, I think the action first, I think we need what kind of action we need. So the policy consultation, that's a UN system and an organization meaning for that. Also, that's one of our advantage, because we can make a comparison among the different cases, different examples from the member countries. Second, the action should be come to the member countries and the private sectors and the farmers. So we can build the on the same page and with the same consensus for agricultural food system transformation. That's what I think we should work on it, because I'm a son of the farmer. We know it's very industrious job to produce food, especially smallholder farmers. 84% of world farmers are smallholder farmers. So work day and night, but still you don't have enough time, enough food to be fed. So we need the government support, we need the technologies that be developed, and also we need some assistance from the infrastructure. So that's, I think, the policy, national policy implementation, and most important, political commitment from the countries. And even some big countries, you need also political commitment from the province. So, and that's what we have happened. Of course, and last but not least, I think we need a more solid international cooperation and coordination. And that's a way we can shift the, reverse the trend of this negative data and the numbers, what we are not acceptable. So I think for that, I stop here and let's work together, and also take each of role of our different organizations of UN, and also more substantial role for member countries. So otherwise the SDGs is no way out. Thank you, over.
Thank you so much, Dr. Chu. I see we have a question from the Ambassador of the United Kingdom.
I'd like to really thank all those involved for the launch of SOFI 2020 and also for the analysis that it provides us with. The key messages are really sobering, and I think we can all join hands and share those key messages across our networks. My question now really is to the principals of the agencies, and what is their vision for the United Nations Food Systems Summit, and how can it help address some of the problems that are highlighted in the SOFI report this year? Thank you, and over.
Thank you. Maybe we'll start with Mr. Hongbo to address that question and make a round with the principals.
Thank you so much. Our expectation from the Food Systems Summit, obviously we had the first meeting of the advisory committee last week, exactly last week, I think, last Tuesday. To me, this is really an opportunity for us to identify along the whole chain, at each level of that chain, starting from the production all the way to the consumption, including the food waste and loss, and identify where the system is broken or is weakened, and then come with a specific tailor-made action plan. And obviously that will have to vary from one region to another, or from one country to another. When I look at that from the perspective of the smallholder, the small-scale producers, my major concern is that even if we look at the policy dimension, if you look at the access to market dimension, the issue around the trade, whatever, we do not consider them at the center of our deliberations. So this is one thing that I'm going to pay particular attention, making sure that the deliberation on the Food Systems Summit, how do we ensure that the 500 million smallholders are at the center of it? And how do we dovetail them with the major commercial farmers, because they are complementary. And when we're talking about the private sector a few minutes, we mentioned private sector a lot today. I want to also submit that it's also help creating the private, or creating or dynamizing the private sector in the rural area. How do we bring the youth today to really embrace ag production as a way of living, not as a last resort? And this creation and development of the private sector in those circumstances is also going to be very key. Over.
Thank you, Mr. Hongbo. For just a scheduling issue, I'd like to actually propose this question to Maximo, as he might need to leave a bit early. This is from the chat box. We appreciate that there are some hidden costs, greenhouse gases, health, that are considered in the calculations. There are studies showing that if all positive and negative environmental and social externalities are internalized, the healthy food could become competitive. Do you agree that we urgently need to apply the true cost accounting principle?
Thank you very much for the question, and I think it has two parts. First, clearly when we are saying that healthy diet needs to be affordable, we are looking both at the supply and the demand side. On the demand side, we want people to have more income to be able to access to food and to be able to afford the food. And that means basically more jobs and better jobs. But on the supply side, we are referring to gains in efficiency. So we are not saying that the small farmers or farmers should earn less. On the contrary, we are saying that there is significant areas of efficiency that we can gain, and they can not only gain by unit, but also they can gain by quantity if they increase their markets. And that's when we refer to increase intra-regional trade and also global trade. But specifically on the externality issue, which was part of the question, if we incorporate all the costs of the externalities, that's basically what we need to know. So I think the first step is to understand what are the trade-offs and how much they are. And that's what we are doing by bringing the cost, in this case, of two elements: the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, and second, the cost over health consequences of a bad diet. But there are also externalities on water and externalities on land, on energy, and on biodiversity. Everything I produce will have a trade-off, and that's what we need to understand first and to measure. Now, what is the problem of incorporating that as part of the price and as part of the cost? Is that we are trying to tackle two issues here. No, one issue is that they need to be affordable so that we can provide healthy diets. And on the other side, we want to keep our environment going. And if we incorporate all those costs, all those trade-offs into the price of the commodity, then it could become even less affordable. So there is a kind of a competitive thing here. And what we need to understand is that the world is too unequal. So we need to find ways into reducing the inequality of the world to be able to achieve that. Because the countries which today need diets, which could be creating more emissions, okay, and which today are affected more on health issues or could affect more their soils, are the countries which are less developed, are the poorest countries. While the countries which already are consuming and generating over the emissions that they need to consume are the North countries, countries which already are doing well. So we need to find a mechanism to minimize and distribute better the costs so that we don't increase even more the inequalities, but on the contrary, allow to reduce them so that we can have better access. What is the mechanism? That's a difficult question to answer, but it's something that we need to explore. Like, for example, trading of emissions is an option. So we can trade emissions to allow this to compensate. But there are different mechanisms that we need to work hard to identify so that we can achieve this. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now we have a question from the chat, and I think I will direct this to Henrietta Fore. This is from Cecilia Gonzalez. I am a co-leader of the Agriculture Nutrition Community of Practice. Donor resources are primarily going to African and Asian countries where the numbers and prevalence of food insecurity and malnutrition are higher. What are the strategies from the UN agencies to still support other regions where, even though in lesser numbers, there are still vulnerable populations suffering food insecurity and malnutrition, including increasing rates of diet-related NCDs, for example, Latin America and the Caribbean, dealing with conflict, migration, natural disasters, et cetera, that exacerbate the issues?
Thank you, Lana. My name is Victor Aguayo. I'm the Director for Nutrition with UNICEF. Our Executive Director had to leave because she has another engagement, but she has left me behind to try to answer this very important question. And I think it is a very relevant one. You were asking us, Lana, before, what are our expectations for the Global Food System Summit that is going to take place next year. And there are a few, but I would say that for us in UNICEF, one of our expectations is very much related to this question. That is, how do we make sure that we put children at the heart of a global conversation around food systems? How do we make sure that the food system transformation that we are calling for responds to the nutrition needs of children and adolescent people in every single country? It starts with Africa, continues with South Asia, with Asia in general, but it also includes children in Latin America. It includes children around the world. The report that we are launching today makes it very clear that access to a healthy diet is particularly difficult for poor countries, but also for poor households in richer countries, countries of higher economy. So a key challenge for us next year is precisely to do that. Make sure that any global conversation on food systems puts the needs, nutrition needs of children and adolescents at the heart of that global conversation. One. Two, also that we do not forget that children and young people can be agents of transformation themselves. We've seen it with the global conversation on climate, how young people and children have been at the heart of the wake-up call. And we do believe that they do have a transformative power to change the way we think about food and the way we think about food systems. We're particularly concerned about the nutrition situation of children in Latin America and in some higher income countries that have been less of a focus of nutrition discussions in the past, where we see increasing rates of overweight, obesity, and diet-related non-communicable diseases, precisely and primarily among children of poorer households. So we do need to realize that the face of malnutrition among children is changing around the world, and that while we still have 200 million children who are stunted and wasted, we have almost as many with micronutrient deficiencies that are terrible for their brain development and their physical growth. And we have an increasing number of children who are overweight and obese. At the heart of all that, poor quality diets for children across the world. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Victor. We now have a question. Oh, I'm sorry, lost it. A question from the chat from India. My name is Dr. Subhash from India. There are so many crises like climate, health, emergency, epidemics, etc. How can we quantify their impact on nutrition and food security? And otherwise, how can we move forward to reduce the risk? I'd like to propose that to David Beasley, please.
Hi, can you hear me? My name is Arif Hussain. I'm Chief Economist and Director of Research at the World Food Program. Unfortunately, my Executive Director had to leave, so he asked me to take questions on his behalf. Let me also start with the food systems question first, and I will get into the second question after that. We are fully committed to the food systems. We are people on the front lines. We like to say that we come in when food systems are broken. So what we are able to do is to see what's wrong. And we are able to help on the side of getting the wrong right. Because when we get the wrong right, our decisions, our policies, our developments, our operations become a lot more relevant than they would be otherwise. You heard my executive director saying that we see smallholder farmers, 500 million of those and their families as the base why food systems matter so much. We as World Food Program, we are on both sides of the equation. We are on the demand side because many of these individuals, we assist them because they cannot make their ends meet. And on the supply side, we buy millions of tons of food essentially for them. So we see what is in the middle, and we are placed and we are ready to help on the food systems to make it real and come up with practical operational answers to many of these questions going forward. It's not that we have to do everything. We can analyze the problem, take it to the right entity to find the answer, whether it is another UN agency or private sector or an international financial institution. The second question, I think overall right now for us, all hands on deck to make sure that these 270 million people don't fall into chronic poverty and hunger. Because what we have seen from the past, from the financial crisis, from the food and fuel crisis of 2008 and 10, that when we let people sell their productive economic assets, the assets they use to make money, it takes them years, if not decades, to get back into the economic stream. So it is critically important, whether we are in Africa, whether we are in South Asia, whether we are in Latin America, that we minimize creation of new vortices of acute and chronic poverty and hunger. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much for that. And now I have a question for Dr. Yamamoto. Mr. Navarro stated that there is no way that one diet can fit all of the world's population to address food security and zero hunger. The current drive of a mainly plant-based diet is surely not feasible for everyone, especially where protein malnutrition remains a problem. A mainly plant-based diet is also very expensive. Do you see a healthy, sustainable diet for all will be different for different parts of the world?
Thank you very much. Again, I can say that some previous speaker has a no one tool fit all. However, we have to think about improving people's health, but at the same time benefit planet health as well. When we talk about sustainability in the planet, we need to think about it. But how to achieve it in the context with the local context in each country's each local situation. That is we need to consider the culture should be sensitive. And also need the partnership with all the stakeholders. But again, I would like to say, Mr. Navarro said planet diet. There's something like a different definition, but we discussing about the health in the planet and the human beings. Otherwise, we cannot sustain our health. And so, but at the same time, when we think about healthy diet or healthy nutrition and healthy diet, again, we discuss a lot about we need a system approach. We need to think about very holistic way. We discuss with water sanitation. We talk about agricultural production and green gas emission, or when the climate change, or we need to think about the use of fertilizer or pesticide for the food development, or we need to think about antibiotics in livestock feeding. And also we need to think about like a microplastic and plastic waste for the packaging issues. Again, we now today we discuss a lot about a holistic approach and the food system approach to do it. So I would like to say again, the health for people, health for the next generation should be considered together with us. Over to you. You are mute.
Very much, Dr. Yamamoto. All right, we have another question from the chat. Increasing affordability of healthy diets means lower food prices. That requires increasing agricultural productivity year by year, sustainably, of course, and basically by small-scale farmers. What are the appropriate policies to facilitate this? Marco, would you like to take that, or shall I give that?
I can, yeah, sure.
Okay, great. Let me recognize Marco from FAO.
Okay. I'm Marco Sanchez, Deputy Director of the Agricultural Development Economics Division, and also co-director of this report. Let me just try to emphasize, this is a good question because affordability indeed is a problem that has to do with the price of food. But as the report presents it, it's also a problem of incomes. So we have to think about these two streams, right? We have the food prices, but on the other hand, we have the incomes problem or lack of thereof for people. So what we are saying in this report is that we have to think systemic. We have to think about the transformation of the food systems, because all the issues that affect the high prices of food, as well as the unaffordability or the lack of income, have to do with the whole food system. Therefore, we need to tackle the problems of food production. Of course, those are the problems that have to do with productivity, which is what the question referred to. But we also have to think about all the inefficiencies along the supply chain. We also have to think about food environments and consumer demand. If the consumer can do good, then the producer can do better and be more productive as well. And one thing that we really looked into very carefully in this report was the political economy of things. I mean, trade policies, for example, have the power to affect the cost of nutritious food. And what we have noticed is that in many countries in the world, even in Africa, there are very important incentives toward the production of, let's say, basic staples, and less incentives toward the production of nutritious food. So to answer the question, the policy options and investments need to be thought of across the whole food system. And here we talk about different things in the report. For example, one thing is the rebalancing of agricultural policy and incentives towards more nutrition-sensitive investment in food and agriculture production. That is critical to incentivize producers to move towards the investment that will boost the productivity in fruits and vegetables production, for example, in protein-rich plant-based and animal source foods, for example. But we also have to think about the policy actions across the food supply chain. Tackling all the inefficiencies is very important for small-scale farmers. The efficiency of international and internal trade is very important as well. We need to use trade and market mechanisms to avoid disincentives to local production of nutritious food. I will leave it here for the time constraint that we will have, but this is just to say that the productivity problem is not just something that we will, let's say, resolve if we just look at the production side. We need to look at the systemic issue here, at the food systems transformation. That includes both producers and also consumers with all these policies. Over to you.
Thank you. If I can just remind all our panelists, if you'd like to ask a question, there is the raise hand function in the panelist list next to your name. Otherwise, I will move to questions that have been rolling through into our chat. I have a question for IFAD. Mr. Hongbo, increase for affordability of healthy diet means lower food prices. That requires increasing agricultural productivity year by year, sustainably, of course, and basically by small scale farmers. What are the appropriate policies to facilitate this?
Thank you so much. I just want to maybe to complement what our colleague from FAO just elaborated on. I want to come back on, first of all, we need to think about the productivity in terms of the best equipment for the production, and the productivity in terms of the human productivity, the productivity of the farmers themselves. So it's important to keep in mind that a lot of those small-scale farmers we are talking about, a lot of them have barely, saying that with great respect, a lot of them have barely finished primary school. So it is important when we talk about the education for them to be able to have a modern way of planting or way of doing their exercising their farming. Secondly is the ability to access and to use basic equipment. And in that, I would like to make reference to the digital agriculture. Up to now, we tend to think that technology is only made for the big farmers, the commercial farmers. And it's going to be more and more important for us to be able to develop policies at the national level or international level that will facilitate the access to digital tools, not just access to apps, but different production or transformation in a way that will help the small-scale farmers to have access to those equipments, but also to be able to afford them in terms of the cost of those equipment. And that will help in terms of the productivity and their ability to add value to to their produce. The other dimension that comes to my mind, how do we organize ourselves? I keep saying that what is important to know is the developing the sense of private sector, the sense of using this agriculture and producing it to make profit. It's not just producing it to survive. It's not just producing it to fight against food insecurity. How do we educate them? Do we train them? Do we help them to embrace a culture, a shift in the culture by saying that despite the risk or despite this and that, I can also make my living just like a carpenter or just like a lawyer by being in the rural and producing staple food or cash crop. That for me is going to also to be quite important in the policy I'm making. Final point is, I will again insist enough, like intervening just in agriculture sector or food sector is not sufficient. It's important for us to develop the policies that will encourage the small scale producers, particularly the youth, to be willing to remain in the rural area. And therefore, it's important to look at the surrounding investment that will also make a life in the rural area a little bit more attractive than it is today. Over.
Thank you. I actually have a follow-up question to that, Mr. Hongbo. How do you incentivize the young people into agriculture when they are the least paid?
Yeah, the fact that the least paid, that itself is a major concern that we have. But we can incentivize them in a different ways. First of all, I believe most of the situation, when you have youngsters that are even willing to embrace ag production, most of the problem they have is access to finance, access to the rural finance. So one way for us is to make that, whatever we could do, and not only IFAD what we're doing, a lot of other colleagues as well, is to different kind of guarantees or different kind of access to finance to make it easier for them, which is one. Secondly, what I just mentioned about the use of technology. The more the youth will have access to technology in agriculture, the more they are gung-ho to practice it, the more they are incentivized to it's not just a matter of the salary or what you're going to pay. Thirdly, it is also a matter of being able to guarantee a market for them. So once they have the production, helping them minimizing the food waste and the food loss dimension, the loss of the production just because of the access to the market or inability to access to the market during the rainy season, for example, through the investment in the road. So, but when we are able to guarantee the market for them, either by pairing them with major producers or distributors, or by having government, sometimes government agencies that can take that production, you give that assurance that they will be able to get income at the end of the season. All of that, so it's kind of a package, a package approach on that. My last point, obviously, I'll come back to whatever we put in place at the policy level to increase the resilience so they know that tomorrow, if a big shock were to happen, and they have some kind of a protection, back to the social protection, including the extreme weather insurance that a lot of us are working on. All of that set of initiative can help incentivize them. Over.
Thank you very much. I have a question for Maximo from Ricardo Cibrian. Economic drivers have created current food systems. Will economy arguments support healthy diets?
I think yes. There are many drivers that have created the current food systems where we are. Now, we need to understand the food system in which we live is not a competitive system. It's a system full of distortions and incentives, which are not necessarily the correct ones. So I think we need to start clearing and aligning those incentives so that markets can operate properly. Both public, private sector, and farmers can start to interact in a more clean system where we don't have the level of distortions we have today. And then we can see how the system will react to the proper incentives. What this is creating today is a significant level of lack of incentives for farmers to produce what they could have produced in an efficient way, and for consumers to consume what they should be consuming to be able to afford to get access to healthy diets. So to keep the answer short, I think if the markets are clear and if the incentives are aligned and if the market is transparent and we reduce the level of distortions we have today, the systems could respond properly, and I believe we can achieve a better situation than what we are facing today.
Great, and you're not off the hook, Maximo. I have another question for you. What is driving the trend in Africa to the point where numbers will overtake Asia despite the big population difference?
Yes, so in Africa, there are several problems faced today. No? So of the 55 countries in food crisis, most of them are in Africa. And what this means, it means that these are countries affected not only by climate issues, by economic slowdowns, significant decrease in GDP, significant levels of indebtedness, but also there is significant conflict in many countries in Africa, which is exacerbating the situation, a reason why they're moving into food crises. And this is what is accelerating the situation that we are facing today. So unless those key drivers change, it will be very difficult to reduce this velocity in which Africa, outside net of the population growth, could be not becoming the bigger one with a bigger share in the terms of undernourishment. And that requires a significant change in political economy. It requires making farmers more resilient to climate shocks. but especially it requires understanding once and for all that we need to reduce the level of conflict and start to think differently. Because if we don't cooperate, like in a situation we are facing today of COVID-19, we won't be able to move forward. And even in the case of Africa this year, the locust is another thing that has affected the region significantly. And by 2020, I assume will even be another fuel to increase the number of undernourishment even at a bigger velocity. So it's a continent that has been choked substantially by external, but also by endogenous shocks, by shocks generated internally, which we need to change and move substantially. And one of the major solutions we're trying to pursue in Africa is to increase intra-regional trade through the increase of food safety measures in the continent so that commodities can flow more within countries of the continent. Back to you.
Great, thank you. I have another question that is more, it's an interesting one, something that all of us as parents may have to face from our children. And it's an interesting question from a father asking, how do you answer your child's question on why there's hunger if the world produces enough food? Is there a way to explain this in simple terms? I might turn to you, Mr. Hungbo. Are you able to give us an answer for the child who's wondering why this can be?
I'm smiling because this question we have been asking ourselves even 20 years ago. I think it goes back to Massimo's point of the market distortion. Sometimes you just need to explain the ABC why production in some countries for different reasons, including the governance, access to input, access to fertilizer, etc., will make somebody having a productivity 20 times higher than other countries. It's also important to, very often what I do when I go to, sometimes I had this question, not even from our children, but from some different audience, is the fact that we need to remind all of us that, that global production is not evenly split over all the countries. Maybe, I don't know if Massimo has recent data on that. Maybe 75% of that production is coming from northern countries and et cetera. So to start with the production, and then you need to look at the ability to transform the production and the access, the different step of the chain. So I have to confess that it's not always easy to explain that to people that have never known what hunger means or feels like. But just taking it that we talk about global and therefore average, but the production is split in one side of the world, not necessarily in the other side, and the access to the productive equipment, and as well as we have to also face it. Sometimes it's governance challenges that makes it even impossible to bring food to some places. I don't think there's a perfect answer to that. Over.
Lana, if I may, this is Victor from UNICEF.
Sure.
Thank you. And questions from children are always the most difficult questions to answer, but I also feel that those are the questions where plain honesty, almost brutal honesty, is due. And I think if my son were to ask me that question, I would tell him, if he's my son, I would say, you need to understand the concept of inequity, son. For the same reason that there is massive poverty in the world, while there is enough money for all of us in the world, there is also significant levels of malnutrition and food insecurity in the world, simply because there is a major issue with inequities, that is, of very unfair distribution of the wealth of many kinds that we have across the world. So the human family needs to make a concerted effort to address this global injustice. That is, we need to put on the table, in the hands, in the households of families, children, young people who simply do not have enough to grow healthy and develop to their full potential, the nutrients, the healthy diets they need. We have all the means to make that happen, and that is what my daughter needs to hear. We have all the means to make it happen, and you need to be part of that solution because we are failing to provide a timely solution to it.
You're muted, Lana.
Thank you very much. I think I'm looking at the time. I think we have time for one last question, and I will direct that to Maximo from the chat. What are some practical, perhaps more doable changes to food systems that can be done in responding to COVID-19, to the COVID-19 crisis that can be implemented to improve food security and nutrition of vulnerable populations? What are some more drastic changes needed, and how can we, at all different levels of influence, make those changes happen?
Thank you. So very pragmatical solutions that we have to move very fast. One is food loss and food losses. We know that COVID-19 will exacerbate food losses, especially in whatever is grown in trees, because you cannot control the production of trees. It takes 3 years. And that could be a good way to help farmers. Why? Because farmers will need liquidity for sure. So we are trying to propose mechanisms of guarantees with the central bank so that they can have 100% guarantee with a 12-month period of not payment, so that they can have the liquidity to assure that they can plant in the next season. But that could be conditional from them delivering those fruits and those vegetables to the local markets, or delivering them to the food banks or to the NGOs that distribute. The second element is to give them quickly more capacity to cope with the situation they are facing, and that's the storage. In Africa, for example, the capacity of dry and cold storage is extremely restricted. So how we can work, instead of the IFIs giving subsidies, which will be diluted very quickly, how we can do changes that will perdure for the future, and developing a green corridor of storage facilities linked to warehouse receipt systems, using ICT technology so that we do electronic tickets that can be linked to the financial system. It's not so complicated, it's not so costly. Building storage facilities today is not so costly. The important thing is to locate the facilities in the optimal places so that we can assure that they have more capacity, because that will allow them to cope. And something that will take longer, but I think could be structurally a game changer, is to improve food safety so that we can accelerate the intra-regional trade. And that's especially important for high-value commodities. Food safety is central. And why it could be a game changer? Because it will allow you to get food from your neighborhood country. In Africa, it's cheaper sometimes to ship the commodity from the country to another continent than to ship to the neighbor country. And that doesn't make any sense. The same applies in the Caribbean, for example, because of the level of tariffs between those countries. So again, we need to be smart and fast in developing solutions that will create a structural change. And we need to try to identify them as fast as possible. That's the way to go today, because we will have limited resources. And we need to find ways to help our farmers to be able to cope, especially smallholder farmers are most vulnerable with this situation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maximo. I realize there are others who have questions, but I'm sorry, due to a technical limitation on our time and on the platform, we do need to wrap up. So if you can please just ask those questions, and we'll try and respond to them as best we can in writing. Thank you so much, everyone all over the world, for joining us today. And I hope this report really is that call to action, the wake-up call that we can really heed and act with even greater urgency, to think out of the box, to step out of our comfort zones, to think about creative collaboration with unusual partners, and to get the world back on track to achieve zero hunger. Before we sign off, I'd like to invite you to join another Zoom webinar in 15 minutes today on transforming food systems hand in hand to deliver affordable, healthy diets in least developed countries, landlocked developing countries, and small island developing states. The registration link is on the FAO New York website, so if you would like to join in, please go register. And thank you again for joining us. My name is Lana Wong, and I'm signing off, but I hope you all stay well and healthy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Appreciate it. Well done, Lana. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Gilbert, Victor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Lana. Thank you very much. Great job.
Thank you. Thank you,
Great
everybody.
job.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Lana.
Be well, everyone.
Thank you, Lana. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.